But I hate when it does that. This is Gas 720 reporting for duty. So this is like week 3, week 4. I wasn't really keeping track of this, but it feels like it's been a while since I was able to do anything to me at least interesting. I haven't like played any I haven't played like a little bit like Halo Infinite and some others. Well, when some others, it's like this one other game I have installed, but this is like really throwing out what I had actually planned. I even had plans for like a game I want to play this month, but I can't now. I'm gonna try to like keep that. I'm gonna try to keep that to a minimum because I've already went on about that enough as it is. But it really is starting to take a toll on me. Like I'm half tempted to just call on a hiatus just for a bit, just for a bit until like I get my computer problems resolved. So weird to say things like that because there's nothing wrong with the computer. It's fine. Like it's made with some of the best parts. My brothers were able to I lost my train of thought. Yeah, it's made with the best parts my brothers were able to acquire. I wasn't really involved because I don't know a thing one about like building PCs. I would have been more comfortable probably just buying one, but here we are. And now we have a problem with our computer not having enough memory. I don't even know how it got filled up so quickly. My brothers had to do a lot of weird stuff. Not weird, but like I know like a lot. I know like they like to mod some of the games we play, and some of them tend to do like other stuff with the computer. I don't know what they were. And I'm afraid to even try and mess with them because chances are they're probably still using them. And the last thing I want is to like get them upset, you know. Even they are like taking up like probably a lot of unnecessary space, but that's just something we're gonna have to deal with in the meantime, or me at least. Yeah, other than that, like my week has been pretty good so far. Weather's been mostly better. It's been like really hot. I mentioned this on my Twitter how I wasn't able to get that much sleep last night because for some reason I was like starting to heat up. Like I was in the oven and I was like sweating a bit. Like it was really hard to get back to sleep. It was yesterday in general was just really hot, so maybe I must have carried over to the night. Today feels a little better. Still feels a little warm, but not as hot, but not as warm as it was yesterday. So yippee for that, I guess. Sorry, I think I have something going on in my mouth. I don't know what it is. I'll worry about it later, but it is gonna distract me a little bit. Yeah, other than like just bad weather, I've also been a little bit busy with like other things, like Final Fantasy 14. Oh hey man, Final Fantasy 14. Like I've been doing like PvP non-stop, just trying to get the Do you remember what they were, the new PvP gear? I can't seem to remember what they're called. They're like the tech wear or something. Oh, okay, they're actually just called techwear. Yeah, I've been like I've been working my ass off, going through Crystal Conflict so many times. And I have nothing against Crystal Conflict. It's a fun enough game mode, but I've always cared more about the PvE side things. So having to focus on this one game mode again and again and again and again, it's just kind of getting to the point where my brain starts to shut off. Yeah, it was starting to like numb my mind a bit, which I'm glad now I don't have to worry about that since I finally got everything I need. I felt slightly compared to show it off Twitter, but I don't know. Maybe I will at some point. I haven't really put that much thought into it. I used it on my my monk lamp. I used it on my monk lamp and my machinist lamp. The machinist lamp was like the one I'm like most experimental with out of all of them because I'm just trying to find the right look that kind of fits with this kind of style I have going on. Even though I consider myself a Dragoon main, like Machine has always been my secondary main. I've also been playing a little bit of Warframe too. Yeah, I mean, like, been mostly focused on Endo, which I haven't been that attentive on compared to just the PvP stuff. Like, I've been, I'm drawing a blank again. Yeah, I've been getting a lot of Endo. I've also been checking out because apparently, there's like something new going on. Maybe not new, but there's something going on in Necrolisk and Warframe. There's been like a lot of Halloween themed stuff. I wasn't even aware about that. So, yeah, that was neat to find. I got myself some interesting things. Trying to remember what they call it, where you have like new scenery to mess around with for like photo opportunities, I guess. I forgot what it was called though. Yeah, I guess all I can say is like I've been spending a little more time. Like there's a lot more interesting things going on in Final Fantasy 14 than Warframe. At the moment, I mean, like right now, Warframe just has like an event, a holiday theme event, and 14's got like this massive update with like, you know, new quests, new main story quests, and new items to get. I don't know. Sorry. Again, there's like something going on. It feels like there's something going on in my mouth, but I don't know what it is. Actually, I probably know what it is. Might be like a type of canker sore, maybe. What? I don't really talk a whole lot, but when I start doing so, I begin to notice something. Like what's going on inside my mouth. I guess we might as well get this over with. Yeah, I've been thinking about like so we're just gonna be watching some videos today. Maybe play some Halo, maybe play some more Halo Infinite as usual. Actually, hold on. I kind of need to vent a little bit because like I have nothing against doing stuff like these, but you know they should be. You know, these are fine things to do. You know, reacting to videos or playing the one game that you really like playing again and again. But like I had a list. I had plans. I even had ideas of like having like Saturdays where I play the game of the week. Not game of the week, but what I don't know, like every Saturday I play the one game, and then every Sunday I might play a little bit of Final Fantasy, Warframe, or anything else on the side. I wanted to do stuff like that. Like I want, like, yeah, I guess that's the thing. I want more variety in my streams, and unfortunately, this isn't what I really had intended. There's nothing I can really do about that. There's nothing I can really do about that, but it really is starting to get to me a little bit. Like I just want to go back and finish Assassin's Creed, or at least like play the game I had intended for October. Anyway, we're gonna be watching a little bit of Mac. Wait, hold on. There we go. Matt McMuscles. He's done a series I've been really enjoying. Called What Happened. Gives us a lot of insight what goes on in like the entertainment industry, mostly video games. He does sometimes like movies too. Actually, wait, hold on. Wait, frick. It gets kind of a little tricky navigating through YouTube. Yeah, YouTube. Like, let me see what is like interesting to check out right now. Because there's been like a lot of videos, and some of them I haven't really had a chance to check out. Or even really remember, because I think I just watched them once and then I just kind of forgot what they were. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, like Body Harvest. I think I remember watching it, but I don't remember what it was, so might as well check this one out. Let me know if you guys can hear any. Like, yeah, let me know if you guys can hear the video, if it needs to be louder or not.
Welcome once again to another alien blasting vehicle.
Oh right, yeah,
episode of What Happened, the show that regularly.
This is that old N64 game that kind of looks like a very early version of Earth Defense Force. Like it's almost uncanny how much this kind of looks like Earth Defense Force.
Reaches back into the realm of hallowed antiquity and pulls out the stuff that had a rough time getting there. This week's episode is squarely targeted on a 1998 release that some of you.
All right, let me see if I can at least. Let me see if I can just make myself a little bit, just a little bit.
Might not even remember. It was a pretty good year for video games after all, but those of you that do are probably nodding wistfully right now. Body Harvest may seem like your average N64 action title.
I loved it. I love how like I don't know. There's just something very blasé about the title, Body Harvest. I don't know. It feels kind of cheap. If I guess it's. I mean, I guess maybe that we're trying to go for. It's a very cheesy title, with this very cheesy, almost like B movie style poster, cover art.
Your name, massive insect overlord, dude in awkward orange armor, etc. But the story behind its creation is what's really extraordinary. It's one that left endless ripples in the well of eternity. Ripples that are still felt across the universe to this day, or just actually just the video game industry. It's a tale of lofty ambitions, globe-spanning voyages, ignoring leadership decisions, and very near cancellations. So put on your dorky helmet and hop into the nearest vehicle, because it's time to find out
it is a rather dorky looking armor.
Body Harvest.
I don't even think you could blame graphics for that one.
Our story begins with DMA Design. You know, this inconspicuous logo right here. It was founded in the late 80s by What Happened all-star David Jones, who last popped up in our episode about the massive confusing disaster that was APB, which I'm honestly still recovering from. Anyway, if you were playing video games in or around 1991, you would have most likely seen this logo in front of the many ports, sequels, and spin-offs of Lemmings, the seminal puzzle platformer that unarguably put DMA to.
I only heard about them from this game. I forgot what it was called. It was like this space station farm with like a bunch of robot animals. I forgot. Like I said, I forgot what it was called, but it's a really quirky game.
Design on the map. This Dundee, Scotland-based studio had been growing rapidly through
Rockstar even worked on that game too.
These dopey rodents or whatever.
The space station farms thing I'm talking about.
They then staffed up alongside all the projects that had begun to come their way. All this big noise about DMA Design then eventually caught Nintendo's eye, who then contracted them to create Uniracers, an underappreciated SNES classic where you controlled bloodthirsty, sentient unicycles. Aside from Uniracers crashing into a legal battle with Pixar,
unicycles mean business.
In Nintendo having to stop production of the game, a story for another time perhaps, the partnership went went so well that Nintendo drafted DMA Design to be a part of their Dream Team, a stable of studios composed entirely of Western developers to provide games for their upcoming
Nintendo Ultra 64.
Nintendo Power pulled back the curtain on this stable in their April 1995 issue, walking readers through the upcoming Ultra 64 hardware and a list of all the developers who were on board, which would surely hype up even the most jaded Nintendo fan. The Dream Team was a fascinating but odd move for the company, as it very clearly placed emphasis on international partners rather than the usual suspects. Perhaps Nintendo had took for granted those usual suspects like Capcom, Konami, and Square, and just assumed they would provide headliner launch titles, which they didn't. So, Nintendo did what they could, which was to attract foreign companies like LucasArts, Acclaim, GameTech, and Time Warner Interactive, which was certainly a killer's row. No, wait, the opposite of a killer's row. A victim's column? Regardless, Nintendo was hopeful that this Dream Team could really elevate and diversify their N64 output, and DMA Design were hyped to be a part of it.
Yeah, with a team like that, you would have like a diverse library of games. I say that, but then I recall like outside of like whenever I hear people talk about the N64, it's usually like Mario, Banjo-Kazooie, Donkey Kong 64, Paper Mario, yeah, no, that's about it. I mean, and the majority of the rest of it is like some more like more obscure. Some of them might not be really all that good or memorable. And I know like the N64 had Paper Mario and this other game called Quest 64, but I think those are the only two RPGs that console ever had. And some of their own like I guess it does also have GoldenEye. But the other shooters that was available on that were like ports of like games that was already available for the PC, Duke Nukem, Quake, Doom. Actually, no, Doom was made for the N64. But that one is also a bit of a weird one because that was like the victim of like Nintendo's weird trend of like adding 64 to everything. So majority of people at the time thought it was just gonna be like, oh, it's like the original Doom game, but now ported into the N64 for some reason. Okay.
As they had been big fans of Nintendo's franchises and design philosophies. They were probably even more stoked when the two pitches they proposed to the publisher were almost immediately greenlit, in addition to a third N64 project under another company. Yeah, this additional third game isn't really all that important to the story, but screw it! Big ups to the always fantastical Space Station Silicon Valley.
That's the one I was talking about. Wait, give me a sec. Yeah, that's the one I was trying to talk about earlier. Space Station Silicon Valley. This wacky game that takes place in this space station / farm with a bunch of robot animals. And that one also, I believe, had Rockstar, Grand Theft Auto Rockstar work on that. It's kind of wild to think about because, like Grand Theft Auto is mostly known for like, with all the drugs, sex, violence, and all that stuff. And this is one of their more earlier titles, like much more quirky, cartoony, silly. I think it might have a little bit of like, edgy humor, but isn't anything too jarring. I don't know. I just find it kind of funny, like how you start out and where you are now.
In Silicon Valley. Anyways, Body Harvest started life as something quite tonally different from what we eventually got. In a Eurogamer interview with designer Brian Baglow, he spoke about some of the game's original inspirations. It was the B-movies of the 50s that really gave Body Harvest its heart. The Blob, Them, even Plan 9 from outer space. The notion of evil aliens showing up at various points in Earth's history to harvest humans for food and resources was so cheesy that it fit into Nintendo's family-friendly ethos while giving the game a real differentiator in terms of look and feel. With the inspiration in place, the Body Harvest team then plugged away on the game's core concepts, which were, according to the same interview,
Yo, where's my Body Harvest protagonist for Smash? Or hell, make him into a spirit.
hampered by the N64's architecture. As I recall, the development tools were never quite up to scratch. There was a constant struggle to get the dev kit to do what was needed and what was claimed in the specification. And because it was proprietary tech, we couldn't even engineer our own solutions to the problems. Even after 2 solid years of development, there were still issues. The gameplay loop just wasn't working, and what Nintendo was seeing also differed from the design documents that had been okayed with them in the first place. To help get the project on track, Nintendo flew out a few employees to pitch in, and while the Body Harvest team appreciated this as it showed Nintendo's dedication.
Man, imagine the pain having to develop a game where like Party A and Party B are like 2 opposite sides of the planet, and they both have to work together to make this one game. Freaking heck.
To the project, this visit wound up rubbing some DMA staff the wrong way, specifically when Nintendo made the tiny suggestion that Body Harvest should completely switch genres, after they had already been working on it for at least 24 months.
Oh,
if
shoot.
we're gonna make our new jobs work,
Nintendo strongly felt that the premise of a lone warrior fighting against an alien invasion would work better as an RPG, which was a genre that the N64 was kinda always lacking.
A lot of sci-fi shooting PC games, I would disagree to that.
As you'd expect, this suggestion ruffled some feathers. In volume 121 of Edge magazine,
Classy.
the Girl issue, another designer by the name of Richard Ralph shared
Some video game magazines were a little risque back then.
his perspective on the visit. Nintendo's input was greatly appreciated, but provided massive headaches for us. Its focus for the game was very different from the original concept. We had problems with their reasoning initially, but after sitting down discussing the possibilities, we came on board. Ultimately, since DMA agreed to this new direction, the Ninty staff flew back to Japan with the hope that Body Harvest was on the right track. The N64's launch had already long been missed, but they still understandably wanted to get a product out of this whole ordeal. To ensure that nothing more would go awry, Nintendo kept closer tabs on the game's progress, holding regular meetings with DMA producers with a translator as a go-between. These meetings, however, didn't go smoothly, with plenty of things getting lost in translation, which led to even more delays. Not only was the gameplay loop constantly in flux, Body Harvest's tone was also starting to change, as DMA design had begun shifting away from the original B-movie inspirations and into a more serious sci-fi epic, something that Nintendo of America and Japan
Well, as serious as I can look, because it still looks kind of cheesy.
and began having differing opinions over. DMA design staffer Steve Hammond wrote a column on Body Harvest back in 2012 for the Scottish Game Network where he explained the issue. Nintendo of America thought the time travel plot was fine, but would rather it was more detailed and complex. Well, that was okay, there had been a lot of detail left out of the game for reasons of space. Nintendo of Japan wanted it simplified. Later in the article, he rephrased the situation with a devastating elegance. Nintendo knew what they wanted and knew when they weren't getting it. The trouble was, Nintendo often didn't know what they wanted, and they definitely knew when they weren't getting that. Certainly some harsh words, but it's clear that Nintendo weren't exactly providing the silver bullets the project desperately needed to fix its problems, despite them still trying with conventional methods. Nintendo of Japan once
Sort of a classic case of conflicting visions. Sort of, because from the side of Nintendo's end, it doesn't seem like Nintendo had a vision, but they wanted something out of this game.
again tried to take matters into their own hands with the opposite approach from what they attempted last time, inviting several members of the Body Harvest team to work alongside them in Japan for 2 weeks at their Tokyo headquarters. DMA staffers felt very much
Jesus, with all the flying from like east to west and west to east, this is I want to say that more money was probably put in their flights than it was for the freaking game.
Out of their element during their time there, and were shell-shocked by the reveal that Nintendo's HQ wasn't filled with question blocks and rainbow roads, but a drab series of cubicles. Nonetheless, they were at least inspired by what they saw, which was specifically the methods of the team that was working on Star Fox 64. Producer/programmer John White explained, "We got to see their whole design approach and it just amazed us. They had a large room with post-it notes covering practically every inch of wall space." Once the 2 weeks were up, the team then flew back to Scotland, but they had an unwelcome surprise waiting for them. While they were in Japan, a decision had been made by the higher-ups. Their other Nintendo contracted game, publicly known as Climber but internally as Zenith, was being cancelled.
Wait. I don't know why I find this funny. Buggy Boogie. I'm so easily amused by silly wordings like that. Buggy Boogie. Buggy Booty. I mean, Buggy Boogie. Buddy Booty. Alright.
Climber but internally as Zenith was being cancelled, apparently done purely to staff up Body Harvest and get it where it needed to be. Zenith was described as a wacky racing game where players raced humanoid characters up vertical tracks via 3D platforming and the usage of various power-ups, and many on the team
that sounds like that would have been a fun game
of how it was coming along. Unfortunately, we don't really have a clear answer whether it was Nintendo or DMA design managers who canned Zenith, but we do know that the team behind it were given a choice. A false choice, really. Join the Body Harvest team or seek employment elsewhere, which unfortunately resulted in 10 people walking away from the studio. John White, for his part, tried his best to motivate the remaining staff to get them across that finish line, but given that he described the situation as trying to motivate people who didn't want to be motivated, it sounds like it was a rough time. Something that the team found solace in, though, was making the choice to double down on what they had wanted to make from the start, an open-world action shooter with a heavy emphasis on controllable vehicles. The orange-suited hero, Adam Drake, would be able to commandeer a variety of cars, trucks, helicopters, and boats, and could even fire weapons while driving, bringing 3D gangland-style warfare to the invading alien hordes.
I want to say this is probably the only N64 game that's kind of had this sort of like, I want to say almost like an open world approach, or at least had like this sort of like this sort of like big sandbox with like all these, you know, different weapons and vehicles that you get to use, plus these giant bug enemies. I mean, I guess again, like it's very reminiscent to Earth Defense Force. Like this is almost like a spiritual predecessor. The only difference is it doesn't have the iconic voice acting from those games, and that cool little song. The alien threats from vicious giant insects who come once again come back. I might have messed the lyrics. I can barely remember it. EDF deploys. I need to look up the lyrics.
This is just me theorizing, but this sudden switch back to the original vision might have been inspired by the runaway success of another little DMA design game called Grand Theft Auto, which had just been released in November of 1997 under another publisher. With their confidence swelling that they were now on the right track, Body Harvest really started to come together. While a lot of their ideas and open world design would come at the sacrifice of graphical fidelity and having to implement a lot of fog, the ability to let players tackle missions in whatever way they wanted was profoundly liberating, so the team felt they had finally nailed what they had set out to do. However,
you know, tanks and helicopters and like boats I can understand, but there's something funny seeing this like this big guy on this tiny little motorcycle. It's almost kind of comical. It's like I can't think of a good comparison, but I don't know. Seeing like a big guy riding on something small is amusing to me.
The company funding the whole entire project would strongly disagree.
More of these weird ads for games. I mean, I've seen this like numerous of times, and they're always like fake. And some of them are just downright weird. Like, this is probably one of the more normal looking ones.
Nintendo was not pleased that DMA Design had basically gone against everything they had previously agreed on in regards to Body Harvest gameplay, and after 2 long, globe-spanning trips and several years worth of work and wads of money spent, drastic measures were coming. As far as we know, Nintendo simply chose to walk away from Body Harvest. They cancelled their publishing contract with DMA Design in the back half of 1997, which fortunately wasn't really the disaster you'd think it'd be. GTA had been an overnight success, and the title's controversial...
God, it feels so weird seeing what GTA actually started out as, because you might mostly remember seeing like this sort of like third-person action game, but then you see this and it's like overhead, and it's... I want to say the original Grand Theft Auto was a little bit more arcadey. Like I can't like it's so like I haven't been this surprised about, you know, about games since like Dynasty Warriors, where apparently the original Dynasty Warriors game was like a fighting game, but then they ended up taking a different approach by making this like I don't know, a hack and slash where you have a huge army at your side. Like I want to say it's like a hack and slash with some like small minor strategic elements.
Violence and content made headlines, which is almost never a bad thing. DMA Design had already been snapped up by Gremlin Interactive, who would eventually themselves be bought by Infogrames, and what happened favorite Midway would pick up the North American publishing rights to Body Harvest without much convincing from DMA Design. In the late 90s, Midway were attempting to diversify their gaming catalog with more console games and less arcade ones, so the timing worked out pretty nicely, although it really didn't work out pretty nicely for Midway long term as, well, just check out this video here. Although with Midway's
TLDR, it was not looking well for Midway.
Financial backing, DMA Design were able to put the finishing touches on this harvesting of bodies, although the ending to the story isn't quite as rosy as one would hope. Despite persevering through the technological issues, the conflicting and ever-changing design philosophies, a staff walkout, and a 4-year-long development period, Body Harvest didn't exactly hit like DMA was hoping it would. The critical reception was decidedly mixed, with a number of reviewers admiring its scope and charm, but not being able to look past the dated visuals and performance issues. Even more damning, Body Harvest...
I bet young me probably would have loved playing this game. And then kind of get frustrated, like, where the hell am I supposed to go? I never had, like, the best sense of, like, direction when I was younger. I'm pretty sure I would have gotten lost and would have been, like, frustrated, like, how long the levels, like, how big the levels were. But I also probably would have really enjoyed, like, you know, just all running around and shooting these big bug aliens.
Harvest found itself smack dab in the middle of the white-hot gaming trend that was professional wrestling games, with WWF.
Oh, plus, like, even though the main character looks look like a huge dork with the orange-blue armor, I probably would have found him pretty cool looking. Like, I don't know, I just have a thing for, like, characters in armor wearing, like, a cool helmet.
Warzone and WCW NWO Revenge on either side of it, just a few short weeks away from DMA's own space station, Silicon Valley, and a small experimental little adventure title called something, The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. It doesn't matter. I couldn't find any hard data on Body Harvest sales, and while Midway's report for the period reported increased home video game revenue that quarter, Body Harvest featured no specific citation and was excluded from the list of their 5 best sellers for that period, which, you know, is somewhat telling. Now, even if Body Harvest had been a smash hit, make no mistake, Grand Theft Auto was still going to envelop the company and go 3D, and Body Harvest really wouldn't have factored into that equation much. Still though, I can't help but think about a timeline where Nintendo and DMA Design really gelled during Body Harvest, resulting in a high-quality launch game that would have moved consoles. If they had somehow managed that impossible task, there's no telling what could have happened to DMA Design and the game industry at large. Nintendo had already heavily...
Or Body Harvest, as far as we know, maybe it would have been like a beloved, like, classic. Maybe we wouldn't even gotten sequels too. Maybe we would have gotten like a, I don't know, Body Harvest 4.
Invested in Rare around that same time frame, so you could easily see them doing the same here. If that had come to pass, then there's a real chance Nintendo could have had a serious aversion to GTA's subject matter, causing it to never exist, or having its content changed to fit Nintendo's more family-friendly image. Or hey, maybe eventually they might have given them carte blanche to make, you know, whatever they wanted, like they sometimes did with their other second parties.
I am the great mighty Pooh.
Geez, the mind overheats with the possibilities of it all. Fortunately, the people that worked on it directly still have great memories of it, with Brian Baglow saying, "I love Body Harvest. It's one of the games that I still get asked about to this day and that many players remember very fondly. It had many problems and it faced many challenges, but I'm still very proud of it." So, while it's now a regularly forgotten chapter of DMA Rockstar Norse history, hey, at least CJ remembers all the bodies that were harvested along the way. If you know of any other intergalactic gaming incidents, do let me know in the comments below, or take a truck or boat or a helicopter or whatever over to my Twitter. See you next time, and thanks for watching!
That is actually kind of interesting. That Body Harvest could have been like, I might have missed on some details, but it's kind of interesting to think about how Body Harvest could have been like Nintendo's like Grand Theft Auto in terms of like gameplay, like some shared concepts in gameplay. And again, I just can't get over the fact how like similar it is to Earth Defense Force. Like maybe one of the people who worked on those games might have catch a glimpse of this and thought, interesting. Let's use it. I'm just trying to see what else. Oh, The Quiet Man. I don't think I never watched this. I think. Probably not. Maybe. I don't know. Let's watch it anyway. I can't remember it, so it's probably a good thing.
Hello and welcome to What Happened, the show that was designed to talk about things like this, or that, or sometimes even these. On today's episode, I'll be taking on one of the more popular requests brought up in my comments section over the last, forever. This episode was also directly requested by Offseer Mio down on my Patreon. Yeah,
The Quiet Man's considered like one of the worst games of all time. Not the worst, but one of the worst.
Who's incredibly patient as I went through my big horror kick during all of October.
Oh, Deadly Premonition. We need to check that one out.
The topic, of course, is The Quiet Man, which was a romantic comedy that was released in 1958. It starred John Wayne.
Dang, I thought gaming started out somewhere in like the 70s or 80s. I didn't know they started out in the 50s. Also, for the 50s, this is some really incredible graphics.
Maureen O'Hara, and the boisterous Barry Fitzgerald. The screenplay was written by Frank S. Nugent and, as we all know, was based on a famous 1933... Okay, that's as far as I'm willing to push that gag. Seriously, though, you'd be shocked at how many more results and articles there are about this farty old film than the 2018 video game collaboration between Square Enix and Human Head Studios. Just as quickly as it was announced, The Quiet Man came and went with some truly damning reviews along the way, where it now remains as one of Square Enix's most forgotten and critically maligned projects of the modern era, which is something I would be saying to you if they hadn't just announced some new form of non-fungible garbage.
I remember people who were speculating it might have some connection to Parasite Eve. What a show this quote-unquote game started.
Anyway, while the inside story of this ambitious melding of 3D gameplay and live-action drama is still pretty mysterious, I hope to at least shine a bit more light into its many shadowy crevices. So, grab your leatheriest jacket and play Dr. Mask thing, play Dr. Crevices. So, grab your...
You know, it just kind of dawned on me, but he's kind of have like a similar fashion sense to of Alex Mercer from Prototype.
Your leatheriest jacket and play Dr. Mask thing as we attempt to answer the question, what happened to the Quiet Man? It all starts with Kensei Fujinaga, whose past works include producing games with Hero in the title, which include the half-minute and no more varieties, as well as producing the localizations of some good old Rune Factory and Arc Rise Fantasia, if you remember that one.
Huh? This little brat is a veteran warrior?
He then landed at Square Enix, and it's there where he had an idea that resonated strongly within him. When I was 15, I believe I got sick. What I got was a PlayStation there. That was like another world I can be in and actually saved my life. I was in a room with 5 other kids there. Actually, one of them couldn't speak, but we didn't need any words. We played together and got excited. Sometimes you don't need words to communicate to be friends. The Quiet Man is communication beyond words, and I knew it from a long time ago. The basic idea would be to produce a title that's heavy on narrative, but revolves around the main character Dane, who cannot hear and speaks very, very little. The story would play out with muffled audio and no meaningful dialogue, so the tale would be fully up to the player to interpret, which was a big ask in an industry that's obsessed with tutorials and hand-holding.
Shut your mouth! I don't need you!
A crucial element of this storytelling was the idea that Dane also naturally understood things about the world that the player wasn't in on, so there was also an intentional knowledge gap between you and him to further enhance the air of mystery. This experimental idea of taking out sound was undeniably a risky one, and it seems that while Square Enix were willing to give it the green light, they didn't or couldn't provide Fujinaga with a dedicated internal team under the publisher's umbrella to bring it to life. Fujinaga then turned...
There's no bad ideas in games, just poor execution. Like, you could definitely make a game about like a physically incapable... I don't know what the term I should use. Physically incapable? Handicap? Yeah, I'm just gonna go with handicap. About a handicapped character, whether they're, you know, paraplegic, deaf, blind, whatever. You just have to, like, figure out how to, you know, design a game around it. Like, he could have a game about a protagonist, but as Quiet Man showed, they really didn't know how to actually do it. Even if the character wasn't even deaf, it still would be a good game.
To the West, and specifically Human Head Studios, who, after the cancellation of Prey 2 in 2011, had been mostly a
rest in peace
support studio on big titles including BioShock Infinite and Batman Arkham Origins, while their internal titles were relegated to smaller scale stuff, like Minimum and their mobile horror game Lost Within, which was actually kind of neat. Human Head was responsible for the gameplay portion of The Quiet Man, and if you ask me, was given by far the shortest end of the stick for 2 distinct reasons. Firstly, they would need to make the gameplay portions that would accompany what was essentially a live-action short film, a high graphical bar to clear despite obvious...
Yeah, live-action cutscenes in games is often a rarity. It used to be a little bit more commonplace back then when FMV was like the hottest thing at the time. And how they also just kind of stopped doing it when they realized it was really gimmicky and they didn't really add anything to the experience except for a lot of like cheesy cutscenes.
Lacking a full AAA budget, and secondly, adhering to Fujinaga's gameplay vision, which was to have minimal, i.e. non-existent heads-up display. No health bars, timer, combo counter, nothing. What's more, the combat system also needed to be kept intentionally simple as well, to make sure the focus was to remain on the story and not like table hopping or witch time. Fujinaga himself talked about how he saw this game as something people should play through in a single sitting, like a movie, so this does make sense even if in practice the combat ended up a bit uninteresting. I believe these two factors probably made up the bulk of what Human Head had to grapple with, but unfortunately I couldn't make contact with anyone from the studio who worked there at that time, and I really tried. That said, I did speak to someone who, while not on the gameplay side of The Quiet Man, was nevertheless integral to its development. Joe Kelly, a longtime comic book writer and one of the founders of Man of Action Entertainment, took the time to answer a few of my
AKA the same people behind hit shows like Ben 10 and I think Generator Rex.
questions, starting with how he got involved with the project. The creator of the project, Kensei Fujinaga, reached out to me about writing for him as he was a fan of my comics work. As was often the case at the time, any work for hire gig like that was offered up to the guys in my company, Man of Action. We took on the job as a writing team. Officially, we wrote the story and the script, but to be honest, I have no clue what our final credit was on the game. We thought that the dual narrative concept was really interesting, and we loved the idea of working on a dramatic mystery action piece. Right, the dual narrative, that's something we'll get to a little bit later. While multiple companies collaborating to make...
Alright, give me a moment. I just ordered something and I think it's here now. Be right back. Alright, I'm back. There we go. Got myself a drink, a smoothie.
Make a massive singular game is nothing new, it wasn't typical for a smaller release to be done in the same way. To lay it all out, The Quiet Man was produced...
Yeah, I've seen that happen a couple of times with other VTubers. That's funny. How sometimes they just leave their model hanging out and then it starts acting possessed for some reason. That's really funny. Just want to make sure everything's like working right. Yeah.
And overseen by Square Enix. with the game portion being handled by Human Head, the story written by Man of Action Entertainment, and a fully staffed film crew in Bulgaria shooting all the live action segments. That's a lot of coordination for what amounted to a brief feature film length game, so despite the scaled back scope, this absolutely must have been quite a complex production to manage.
I wonder what this is. Ah, okay, just anime. I don't know why. I thought it was like another game. I thought it was like another add to a game or something. That skeleton looking guy looks really cool. Anyway, I'm getting distracted.
Joe Kelly also let me in on the dynamic between the main creative entities behind the game and how the script and story needed to be changed in accordance with their tight deadline and even tighter budget. Kensei worked at Square, so since it was his baby, he was the lead on development as far as I know. That said, when partners like Human Head are involved early on, they tend to have a say in development because they are flagging in advance what they can and can't execute based on budget, bandwidth, expertise, etc. So on the story side, we'd get notes throughout about assets we need to scale back / change, etc. based on the evolving production. Some of that evolution resulted in the original script for The Quiet Man having several levels and locations dropped completely, along with additional subplots and set pieces, which Joe stated originally made for a grander, more dense mystery. The language barrier between Man of Action and Square Enix also proved to be a bit of an issue, as it usually tends to be on projects being made with oceans in between them. Even though we had excellent translation, nuance and story points can get lost or misunderstood. Cultural perspectives are in play as well. What feels right in one storytelling tradition may fall flat in another. And of course, the late night phone calls were always fun. We were also not involved past a certain point, which is unfortunate as so much of the project was filmed. In live action, having writers there to massage dialogue and help produce the work is critical. We tried to make that happen, but unfortunately, it was not possible. As far as game development goes, that's fairly common. Writing teams invariably finish their work far before the rest of the team and usually move on to other projects before anyone else. It does make you wonder, though, how some of the more awkward moments could have been smoothed out had Joe and co. been on set during the filming. But of course, making a mixed media action / movie game with such an ambitious audio style and communicating its appeal to fans and the press was always going to be an uphill battle. But when The Quiet Man was announced at Square Enix's E3 2018 presentation, many journalists and fans were left scratching their heads. Game Informer's preview article said it all in the title. I talked to the Quiet Man developers, and I'm still confused. The only other
That's pretty bad when you try to get a little more information about the game the developers are working on, and you still end up going like, what? What? Huh? That's really bad.
Element to the game's marketing campaign was a surprisingly well-produced making of video, and really, that was it. The game was announced in June and was due to punch its way into stores that very November. While tight announcement to release windows are generally quite well regarded in the gaming space these days, it does make you curious what Square's expectations were for The Quiet Man's performance for them to spend so little on the ad campaign in the first place. Now, while some people were intrigued by its unique premise, and perhaps the thrifty $15 price tag, a lot hangs on the execution of ambitious ideas to really catch on, but unfortunately, critics instead sounded off with their grievances over these ideas.
Yeah, the gameplay suffered from clunky combat, and since the whole game is like muted, you wouldn't really understand the story, which is pretty bad when the whole point of it that you're trying to play a game through like a deaf person perspective. Like, you could clearly design a way to like use a visual language for the audience to understand. Otherwise, like again, it's the equivalent of just going through an entire movie or game and just have it muted, and you're gonna have like no idea what's going on. And the mystery angle for the game is also pretty weird. I'll probably get to it when at the end of this video.
Not gonna sugarcoat it, but the critical reception to The Quiet Man can charitably be described as pretty savage, with various publications dunking on it with headlines like Game Informer's "The Sound of Failure," Eurogamer's "A Juvenile, Incompetent Embarrassment," and Digital Trends, "You're better off setting $15 ablaze than playing The Quiet Man." Oof. Clearly, the adventures of Dane McLeatherjacket simply weren't gelling with people. While the game clocked in at around 3 hours long, it still felt needlessly padded out.
Hey, the average length of my streams. I know I'm going to be playing when I get my hands on it. I mean, I know what game I'm going to be playing later. I totally screwed up what I was trying to say there.
Extended sections featuring wave after wave of identical enemies with extremely little gameplay variation in between. You didn't get any new moves, weapons, items, or solve any puzzles. It just wasn't meant to be that type of game. You watched a cutscene, punched some guys, and that's really it. The moment-to-moment combat was therefore heavily criticized, with many feeling it was just slow, clunky, and unrewarding. In cases like this, you'd then hope that the plot would be the saving grace, but quite frankly, it just wasn't. It's hard enough.
Nope, it couldn't stand on either leg, so it ended up just flopping on the floor.
To deliver a well-told story with characters who can speak to one another on the best of days, but dropping the sound and dialogue on top of that was a real death blow. There are plenty of examples of video games presenting stories without these things by leveraging concepts like environmental storytelling, but unfortunately, that just wasn't what Fujinaga was going for. With The Quiet Man's PS4 Metacritic score in the 20s, there really wasn't a way to sweep all this negative criticism under the rug, so in what I think was a pretty unique move, Square Enix marketing leaned into it. A trailer running down the game's accolades actually started out like this.
Inexplicable, catastrophic failure, spectacular disaster, worst joke of the century, trash.
It really takes some balls to do.
That is actually really ballsy to do. Like, okay, so we can't market how good this game is. Let's market it how bad the game is. As wild as it is, some people do like, trashy games. Some people like to play trash.
Yeah, the back half of the advert puts forward some choice quotes from some of the more positive reviews, but it's a pretty earnest way to tackle the game's more than divisive reception.
Oh.
The Answered DLC update launched shortly after and did exactly what was advertised by restoring the sound and dialogue and thus the truth of the story as it was written. Unfortunately, this didn't appear to move the needle much in The Quiet Man's favor. In fact, it actually kind of had the opposite effect in terms of the larger conversation surrounding the game. It's here where we can loop back around to that dual narrative Joe Kelly mentioned, because while some critics and fans theorize that the Answered DLC was a reactionary move on Square's part to somehow salvage the game's poor reputation, which was a little silly given that the update launched literally 1 week later than the game, Joe confirmed to me that was, of course, 100% untrue. Providing context to the game's plot in the form of a DLC update was always in the plan from day one, with the intent being to let players interpret what they thought the story was about, and then reveal the answers to see if they match with the player's perceptions of the events, or challenge any incorrect ideas they had developed during their first playthrough. Some people lamented the fact that you needed to beat the game once in the soundless mode in order to just unlock the answered content, which was less than ideal, considering.
Yeah, that's kind of a lame reward for beating a game. Just like, oh, now you can actually hear what's going on in the game now. Okay, yeah, good. It also kind of has like complete like lack of faith in your audience for like trying to understand, even though like we couldn't really understand the game because they did such a poor job trying to convey what's going on through just visuals alone.
So many disliked the gameplay portions to begin with. Not to mention, there were also people criticizing the non-committal nature of the DLC, when it seemed like the game was meant to empathize with the hard-of-hearing community in the first place. So yeah, the DLC really didn't help, and after that, Square Enix just stopped talking about the Quiet Man altogether. But when you step back and look at everything as a whole, this is absolutely one of those rare cases where everyone was just trying to make something special and unique, but it simply didn't come together in the end. While the industry has experimented with a myriad of novel storytelling techniques over the decades, from games with only text to games with minimal visuals like The Perception, The Quiet Man proved to be just too complicated and nuanced of an idea to feasibly do with limited resources, scope, and time, and this is something Joe Kelly regrets, as the idea had really intrigued him. While flawed in many ways, The Quiet Man was at least an attempt to try something new, mature, and different. So many developers and publishers take the safe route, so we get clones and sequels ad nauseum. While those games may be technically perfect and provide a predictable experience, they're ultimately forgettable and will be replaced by the next iteration. You don't get home runs without taking chances. I know that The Quiet Man was a big miss for Square and for Kensei personally, but I hope that he continues to find opportunities to experiment and to try new types of games. Nothing would be sadder to me to think that a commercial failure clipped the wings of a budding creative in any field. Now, Kensei still seems to be working at Square Enix according to his Twitter account, but as far as I can tell, he hasn't yet been credited for a project since The Quiet Man, outside of a thank you on Babylon's Fall at the time of this writing, so at least that's something. And as Joe said, while the game
I hope that's
really
something.
was a miss, as it also amassed a number of Worst Game of the Year awards, it would indeed be a shame if risky and creative voices like Fujinaga were forever forced to be quiet. Man.
Oh no, it's fine.
Thanks again to Joe Kelly for answering all my questions. And if you know of any other troubled developments in the video game or movie industries, do drop me a line.
Like I'm not doing anything special, just watching videos right now. And kind of going through a little bit of an existential crisis. As usual.
Twitter, before Twitter explodes. See you next time, and thanks for watching.
Yeah, looking back on it now, Quiet Man is like a very ambitious game that unfortunately never really lived up to its vision. Wait, hold on. I think my cat wants something. I can hear him scratching on my door. Need to take care of that before he ends up chipping the paint off and he might start eating the paint chips, and I really wouldn't want him to do that. Just leave it here, I guess. All right, I'm back. And get everything back on. All right. All right. Now there shouldn't be any more distractions. Anyway, I really want to check out Deadly Premonition. I'm very curious about the backstory of that game. If I can find it. There are a lot of games. Okay, new idea. One of the horror games of all time, Deadly Premonition.
Few games have left more of a lasting impact on the entire video game industry than 2010's quirky open-world horror experience, Deadly Premonition. Decades from now, when all the forgettable live service games are dead, buried, and vanished from all living memory, the town of Greenvale, the unforgettable Francis York Morgan, and the forbidden Sinner's Sandwich will endure in the hearts of many. Well, maybe not many, but a small and passionate fan base.
There are dozens of us. Dozens!
While still considered a low-key, under-the-radar release, this unique 7th-gen specimen was nearly cancelled on several different occasions over 5.5 years of development. It's a fantastic, twist-filled tale of advancing hardware technology, looming lawsuits, and lots of coffee. So put on your most stylish suit and grab a can of the pickles. It's time to find out what happened to Deadly Premonition. To really get to the roots of this particular project, we have to start.
I don't know why I laughed to just the word pickles. I guess it's the way how it's like enthusiastically delivered.
With the main creative force, Hidetaka Swery65 Suehiro, who will hitherto be referred to as just Swery. His video game career kicked off at SNK, where he worked on Kizuna Encounter and the Last Blade series, then contributed to Tomba 2, before finally landing a main designer position at a short-lived studio by the name of Deep Space. There he helped develop the survival horror game Extermination, which, while fairly unremarkable, signaled the debut of the indelible Forrest Kaysen, albeit only in text, who is a recurring character that Swery has based off a real-life friend of his. After Extermination, Swery felt he
looks a little
took
like
on a
Gabe
more
Newell.
challenging creative role and thus helped in the founding of Access Games, along with a number of other Deep Space staffers in 2002. Access had up until then been a producer of computer graphics software, but decided to move into game development and take on the world. While it was still early in his career, Swery was a big part of this evolution as he was tasked with heading up their debut game as both writer and director. The result was Spy Fiction avec Forrest Kaysen, which came out worldwide on the PS2 by the end of 2004. Despite a unique disguise mechanic and some entertaining dialogue, Spy Fiction was compared rather unfavorably to Metal Gear Solid in terms of gameplay, so Swery's directorial debut
went not gonna lie, it looks very reminiscent of like Metal Gear Solid.
And largely unnoticed. Still didn't stop me from having him sign a copy though. So although it didn't achieve the sales success they were looking for, as it turns out, it was what planted the seeds of Deadly Premonition's long gestation. Tomio Kanazawa, a producer at Marvelous Interactive, who would go on to work on such titles as Rune Factory 3, Contact, and Flower Sun Rain, had been wanting to put into production a open-world mystery game and was looking for a director who would fit the bill. In an interview with Polygon, he stated, "When I played Spy Fiction, I thought that the person who made this game would have the skills to work on my game. It just so happened that after the release of Spy Fiction,
I don't know. That's like the kind of mindset you want to go to if you want to find like people who works in the game industry. Like I wouldn't really want someone who has experience in the horror games work on like I don't know a light-hearted action game. But then again, I guess that would happen with Hi-Fi Rush. So what do I know, I guess.
Fiction, Swery and his team spent the better part of a year figuring out what their next original game was going to be. So when Kanazawa pitched his premise, along with the backing of Marvelous Entertainment, they were more than ready to jump straight away into pre-production. Swery, in a
God, this game really does look like Metal Gear Solid.
Mortem featured in Game Developer Magazine, explained, "The creativity that built up over so many months was about to explode, looking for an outlet to express itself. Our energy found an explosive release in the form of Marvelous Entertainment and crystallized into what became Deadly Premonition. The process was logical, and you might say that we set out to follow a standard development course, but that course turned out to be more precipitous than we could have imagined, and it was, quite literally, a bloody few years. Numerous obstacles stood in our way: unclear next-gen console specs, the decision to go multi-platform, and the threat of project cancellation." Ah, that's right, multi-platform. Because of the PS2's continued popularity in Japan and the upcoming hype around the Xbox 360, Access planned to develop the game for both machines simultaneously. Thankfully though, the PS2 appeared to have been dropped 1 year in, according to a development schedule printed in Game Developer Magazine. According to the post-mortem, creative elements like story, characters, and world building went as good as a crisp spring morning, so when Swery described it as a bloody few years, it begs the question, what went wrong? Well, pretty much everything else. Making an open-world game and developing for unfinished next-gen hardware are tall tasks alone, but doing both alongside an experimental new idea and still trying to support the PS2, truly it was going to be a tough few years. In fact, even their coffees would tell them so.
Yeah, by the time the 360 and PS3 was coming around, a lot of like developers around the time were really kind of like in a struggle. Like it was really starting to become like a sort of like survival of the fittest kind of thing.
In September of 2004, the team began working within a very particular design framework that Swery had proposed to bring the game to life: the 3 reels. Alright, that needs some explanation. To create the easygoing atmosphere and believable lived-in charm of the town, Swery proposed developing it with 3 key pillars in mind: real scale, real time, and real life. Real scale was in regards to the actual physical size of the town and the world around it. 5 square miles of drivable, explorable Pacific Northwest landscapes. Swery and the members of his team even visited the US and measured the size of roads and buildings, among other things, and took thousands of photos to nail the scale. Real time had to do with the 24-hour cycle the game ran on. Many events, items, buildings, and characters were only accessible at specific times of day, with one of the more infamous ones being enemies that would prowl the streets after midnight. Finally, real life revolved around every character's daily routine, with each one moving around the town completing their own unique errands or jobs to really drive home the fact that the town actually functioned on its own, independent of the player's actions. According to Swery, implementing all these—
I'm not gonna lie, that's actually kind of technically impressive. It's almost like, I guess like a Bethesda game in a sense.
Elements was incredibly difficult, and even members of his own team, in Swery's words, provided a great deal of resistance, but he remained steadfast on their importance and ultimately felt that this attention to detail made for a better experience. In the Game Developer Magazine post-mortem, Wataru Nishide, lead level artist, and Jace Kataoka, the lead programmer's rad nickname, detailed just a few of the hurdles the team faced in trying to implement the 3 reels. Deadly Premonition was our first stab at next generation
For real, for real.
development, so we began the project astounded by the vast amount of RAM available, much more than any previous consumer hardware had offered. Astonishment gave rise to overconfidence, and eventually to the worst case scenario: our data management became sloppy. The result was a constant struggle with remaining RAM. This was glaringly evident with the motion data in particular. It ended up occupying a truly massive chunk of memory, which led to system restructuring further down the line. In addition, we set far too many objects in our outdoor scenes and could not process them all effectively. Dealing with trees and shrubs was especially trying. With that said, cutting too many objects would have reduced the object density of our expansive outdoor map to unacceptable levels. So we had to keep both the optimization of code and the appearance of our world constantly in mind. The whole post-mortem is incredibly detailed, and if you'd like to learn more about the technical ins and outs, I'll link it in the description below. It wasn't all relegated to memory issues either, as some problems came about simply due to inexperience and lack of staff. Ever wonder why the music and voice acting of Deadly Premonition was so memorable, but sound mixing and sound effects were, not?
Monkey squirrels! I don't know what you're talking about. That was a legendary moment right there. Monkey squirrels. You just walk down the sidewalk, you see a squirrel, and it starts making monkey noises. Do you give it an acorn or a banana?
Access Games knew how crucial the music and voice acting were in their pursuit of building a convincingly moody and atmospheric world, but sound effects were unfortunately not given the same priority. Why is that? Well, it's because Access Games simply didn't have their own dedicated sound team. According to Keiji Tiranishi, who is credited for a variety of roles on Deadly Premonition, a third-party company was contracted to create the game's wide array of sound effects, and he felt that Access Games quite simply lacked the audio know-how to properly ensure the quality of said sound effects. Voice acting and music are admittedly probably easier to eyeball or earball, but sound effects... yeah, that works, I guess. It's because of this that the quality was a little less consistent and polished than the rest of the game, and considering we're talking about Deadly Premonition here, that's fucked up. Programmer Yutaka Okawa recalled his excitement at the idea of integrating NVIDIA's physics software to increase various physical qualities in the game's world, but he also recalls many additional headaches that grew from a lack of experience with the tool. After incorporating too many realistic physics behaviors into the world of our game, we often found ourselves at their mercy. Game worlds require not infrequent cheating, but physics behavior is brutally honest. Physics behaviors would often be at odds with what we were expecting, so adjusting the parameters to make things look right was rough indeed. This was especially true for characters, whose physics behavior would change any time their motion data was altered. As a result, even parts of the game that had already been approved would immediately break after motion tweaking. So, after 2.5 years of work, Deadly Premonition would finally be unveiled to the public in September of 2007 at the Tokyo Game Show. Sorry, did I say Deadly Premonition?
Deadly Premonition is such a trippy game.
I meant to
I sometimes forget how weird, how surreal the game can be.
Say Rainy Woods. A full trailer was shown which confirmed a release for the Xbox 360 and PS3 and was slated for a 2008 release. However, about a month after this showing, it mysteriously disappeared from the public eye, leaving some to wonder its fate. This is because, behind the scenes and despite nearly
Or was ever a thing at all.
3 years of work, Rainy Woods was being reassessed internally, with the edge of a rusty axe precariously hovering above its head. After TGS, Access Games and Marvelous Entertainment remained mum on the project all throughout the rest of 2007 and 2008. This is because several decisions, both business and creative, were happening behind closed doors. And while some sources have since cited Rainy Woods as being outright cancelled during this time, that doesn't seem totally accurate. The game went through several changes and revisions, that's true, but the core story, cast of characters, cutscenes, and gameplay remain largely the same. During that 2-year gap, there was a rumor circulating about the nature of the delay, which even in 2022 still hasn't been 100% confirmed. When Rainy Woods was re-revealed under its new title, fans quickly spotted several aesthetic differences.
Kind of funny how it went from being called Rainy Woods to Deadly Premonition. I don't know. I always find the title of Deadly Premonition kind of a funny name because, like, what does that even mean? Like, sometimes your title has to have, like, some kind of, like, meaning or relevance. You can't just call it whatever you want, like Bubba Goo or something. Unless you do, and there's a reason for that.
Rainy Woods' FBI agent, David Young Henning, changed into Francis York Morgan, complete with a more distinct makeover, as did George Woodman, who adopted a gruffer, more intimidating look. The twin characters of Isaac and Isaiah had their older forms changed into their more cherub-like origins, and probably the most telling of all, the otherworldly dimension York visits throughout his investigation went from basically the literal Red Room from Twin Peaks to a more unique forest setting. These differences, along with the title switch and renaming the town to Greenvale, spurred rumors that the rights holders for David Lynch's seminal TV drama might have contacted Access Games and/or Marvelous Entertainment. When asked in interviews throughout the years, Swery and other members of the staff feigned ignorance of the similarities or dodged the questions completely, which, certainly makes you wonder. It was only in 2021 where York's voice actor Jeff Kramer confirmed on a stream with YouTuber Whitney Plays that litigation might have indeed been a factor. The first game actually took even longer than it should have because I had recorded the entire game, and then they ran into some issues with the producers of Twin Peaks. It was Rainy Woods originally, and then I had recorded the whole thing, and then they called me a while later and said, we have to change the game title and we have to change the name of the character. Of course, we don't know whether this was Access Games and Marvelous acting preemptively. The game's first trailer was instantly likened to Twin Peaks by many after all, or whether the producers of Twin Peaks did in fact contact Marvelous and air their concerns about similarities between both properties, which then logically hastened certain revisions within the game. Since neither camp has openly breathed a word about this issue, we don't know definitively if this was the case, but regardless of the reason, it certainly seemed like there were enough concerns for it to happen. By the way, do check out this video over on Whitney Plays if you'd like to see every tiny change between Rainy Woods and Deadly Premonition, including songs, text, and voice files. Fascinating stuff.
You know what? I might.
Post-mortem. It states that shortly after TGS 2007, Rainy Woods was re-evaluated and put on indefinite hold. When asked years later about whether the similarities to Twin Peaks had been a part of that situation, producer Tomio Kanazawa offered two quotes in a Eurogamer piece. The diplomatic, well, it's very difficult to say, and the juicier, let's just say, politics. Even to this very day, these are the same type of answers that former Access Games staff members will give when the subject is brought up. Whatever it was that happened, it wouldn't be until early 2009 that the game would finally re-enter development. Out of all of the changes that the game saw, it was indeed the emergence of Francis York Morgan, which was the most major one. Swery had said that he felt he had to start from scratch on the main character after Rainy Woods was cancelled. David Young had been described as an uppity, cynical detective, whereas York was a pop culture loving weirdo. How did this change come about exactly? Well, this metamorphosis was helped along when Swery reached out to American friends for advice on how to make York more relatable, and his late-night conversations about movies with
because nothing's more relatable than a guy with a split personality, and he's able to interact with said personality like he's freaking Moon Knight.
The director Kenji Gota, which also found their way into the game via York's discussions with his unseen mental passenger, Zach.
That reminds me, Zach. Did you know this one? Jaws also appears in another movie that was produced by Spielberg. The second Back to the Future.
While this served a gameplay purpose by having something to listen to during long drives between the milk barn and the police station, Swery thought it was a good way to reach out emotionally to the player to make them feel more of an active participant in what was going on.
You know, the monster in that one responded to sound.
Wait, Zach. Sounds a lot like the movie Tremors.
I think that one was back in '89, directed by Ron Underwood. Now that was a great role for Kevin Bacon. Masterpiece.
So, as I was saying before, there are a lot of really amazing things about the internet.
As things were finally coming together by the end of 2009, the team also had to contend with working on the PS3 port, which would ultimately release two.
The freaking semen. That one really caught me off guard. Like I was like hearing like a really pleasant conversation about like some movies I actually know and like. To freaking seaman.
2 weeks after the 360 version in Japan. The rest of the world wouldn't see it on the PS3 until years later. In Japan, the game would be titled...
I'll be honest, I thought this was a PS2 game. I didn't know it came out on PS3. Like maybe late PS2.
Red Seed's Profile, while Deadly Premonition was chosen for every other region. UTV Ignition Games picked up the North American publishing rights and made sure to slap it with a warning label in the form of a big old $19.99 price tag, which certainly raised a few eyebrows. Rising Star Games would handle the EU version, which would launch a few months behind North America. Swery has gone on record saying this initial launch of the game was not profitable, like at all, and has been quoted by Polygon saying in 2013, before the release of the director's cut version, that so far there's no economic success from this game. However, in 2011, Shane Bettenhausen, who was working at Ignition at the time, described Deadly Premonition as one of the most successful games we ever published, and a small hit. So it's likely that the modest success it did get didn't really result in any huge financial dividends trickling back to Japan. Deadly Premonition's initial impact across the world could
I guess we can say that it was like somewhat of a success, or at least like say as successful as The Room is. Time Wiseau's The Room.
Be described as a dull thunk, with lots of websites and magazines dumping on its shoddy technical performance, poor controls, map navigation, sound mixing, dated-looking graphics, as well as a whole host of other issues. But despite this, there were a few publications that saw beyond all that. Most notably, Destructoid's widely shared review saw Deadly Premonition in a completely different light than most, and awarded it a perfect 10 out of 10 score. This review became so famous, in fact, that Rising Star Games even printed it as a kind of seal of quality on the box art when they released the EU version a few months later. Cheers to you, Commander Sterling. This all came to a head later in 2012, where Deadly Premonition was awarded Most Critically Polarizing Survival Horror Game to Ever Exist by the Guinness Book of World Records, a record that may or may not need to exist, but hey, it certainly earned it. In conjunction with all of this, fans began posting clips of the game's cutscenes across social media, with the most memorable being the scene that introduces the legendary Sinner's Sandwich. Seeing snippets like this gave the unfamiliar a brief peek into the game and Swery's off-kilter sensibilities, and it only kept building from there.
I can't believe it. This is fantastic. It's really good.
Over the course of the next 2 years, the game slowly garnered, in the most pure sense of the term, a cult following. Swery noticed this swell of support and in an interview with Polygon said, "We released Deadly Premonition right when Twitter was starting to get big. I received so much feedback from users thanks to Twitter. It was a big surprise. It came flooding in so suddenly." This turn of events was not lost upon the publishers, who financed a 2013 PS3 Director's Cut version which added extra content and polish, more cutscenes, quality of life improvements, PlayStation Move support, upgraded textures, and even stereoscopic 3D.
Because if there's a game that ever needs motion controls, it has to be Deadly Premonition. I want the experience of actually using a fishing rod.
Cause why not? This version was also released on the PC that October, which obviously let more potential players enjoy the game's eccentricities. As one more little footnote, in Japan the director's cut was named Deadly Premonition Red Seed's Profile Complete Edition, which I believe is the
That is quite the mouthful.
last time they ever used the Red Seed's Profile name. RIP, buddy. At some point during all of this, even Microsoft caught wind of Deadly Premonition's viral popularity and contracted Swery to cook up that same special stew for the episodic Xbox One exclusive D4 Dark Dreams Don't Die, a trippy adventure that surprisingly made fantastic use of the Kinect. Swery recalled that Microsoft producers specifically asked him to implement nonsensical, memeable moments into the game in an attempt to get more people talking.
I just realized he turned like the utensils in the hot dogs into like dancing feet. What the hell?
This, along with a strained launch for the console itself, unsurprisingly didn't equate to strong sales, and D4 was cancelled by Microsoft after only the first 2 episodes had been released.
That's
Swery
sad.
did maximize the opportunity though, as he was still able to get Forrest Kaysen in there one more time, and even got to reuse the name David Young for its charismatic Bostonian hero. When it was clear D4 wasn't going to be continuing under Microsoft, Swery decided it was time to move on and established his own independent studio, White Owls Inc., which would obviously allow for more autonomy. In the wake of his departure, Access Games continues to operate without him, although they seem to have transitioned into more of a support studio role over the last few years. Now, while Swery and his team were exploring game ideas like D4 and JJ Macfield and the Island of Memories, fans were still expressing desire for another Deadly Premonition. This is something you can't really blame them for, as a scene that was added in the director's cut heavily hinted at a possible follow-up that would take place in New Orleans. And while Swery expressed gratitude for the support, he never confirmed that a sequel was officially in the works. That'll change in 2019 during a Nintendo Direct where, Dead 2... Hang on, how are you supposed to pronounce it? Wait, no, it's just Deadly Premonition 2, A Blessing in Disguise, was announced for the Nintendo Switch alongside a fresh version of the original.
The classic case of like trying to cram in like numbers into titles like Expend 4 Balls or Fantastic. Really hate that. I really hate that naming trend. It's so stupid, but at the same time, it's really hilarious. Like sometimes you get like cases like Dead 2E Premonition, Dead 2E, Dead 2E Premonition.
Original, called Deadly Premonition Origins. This was a milestone direct, by the way, as several YouTubers embarrassed themselves with cringy reaction videos.
Awesome.
Welcome back to where nothing.
Oh, yeah!
2019.
Oh my god!
Again.
While fans of Deadly
Self-burned
Premonition
air.
were ecstatic, they were also a bit curious. How was Swery juggling all of this? Since 2018, he and White Owls had been busy developing the crowd-funded adventure game The Good Life, which just so happened to take place in an English village known as Rainy Woods. Oh my god, it's all connected. Anyway, since they were still knee-deep in that, DP Origins, as well as a lot of the heavy lifting on DP2, was done by Toybox Inc., a studio co-founded by Harvest Moon director Yasuhiro Wada. Unfortunately, perhaps due to taking on too much all at the same time, A Blessing in Disguise didn't generate the same positive response as York's original adventure, neither from his critics nor many of Swery's most ardent fans. Its launch was heavily marred by several technical issues and bugs, some even more debilitating than what was seen in DP1, and while a number of these were alleviated through patches and the release of a PC version, many were still understandably soured on it. None of this has stopped him from creating though, as he's still scheduled to deliver a mysterious title with Goichi Suda that we'll hopefully learn more about soon. On a personal note, that's a cocktail of madness I'd absolutely like to take a sip of whenever it becomes available. Throughout it all, Swery has been immensely appreciative of all his fans that have supported him throughout the years and loved Deadly Premonition despite all the hardships the team went through, and the technical problems that resulted from its fractured development. Swery blames himself for many of those fractures, saying in the post-mortem, "The ideal director is supposed to be able to handle both game quality and project progress, but that was a very difficult proposition for me at the time. I regret forcing my development team to work longer and harder than was necessary. It may be true that the lack of technical expertise covered above contributed to scheduled delays, but as the man surveying the entire scene, the greatest responsibility lies with me. On this project, I worked myself to the bone, single-mindedly absorbed in production to the point of blindness, unable to see the people around me, which may be why Deadly Premonition has such a strong sense of authorship." So, while it's been a bumpy road, Swery and the people he's worked with have certainly learned a lot along the way and continue to do so. From being an almost complete unknown in the early 2000s to putting his blood, sweat, and tears into a passion project and then eventually winning over a legion of hardcore fans some 20 years later, it proves that it's really not only about the end goal, but the path you took to get there. Isn't that right, Zach? If you know of any other mysterious mysteries in the video game or movie industries, post them up in the comments below or take a long, relaxing drive over to my Twitter.
Die.
See you next time, and thanks for watching.
You know, to keep up with the theme, let's check out that Friday the 13th one. Actually, nah. Maybe something else. Oh. Until Dawn. I should probably clarify, the show doesn't just cover games that, you know, it doesn't just cover games that, you know, that are just bad. It could... It's really just about the, you know, the history behind the game, so regardless if the game came out bad or good. I'm saying this because Until Dawn is actually, well, at least the original one was, from what I was able to recall, it's actually a pretty successful game.
Welcome once again, all you inept teens and youngsters, to another chilling episode of What Happened, the show where, "Matt," you all scream in terror and anger. "Why are you covering Until Dawn? That game was so dope. It had serial killers, jump scares, Wendigos, and Freddie Mercury." I know, right? It was one of the most well-received horror experiences of the last decade, and really seemed like it had the potential to become the next big Sony franchise. Unfortunately, its long and protracted development may have contributed to those dreams being dashed, or in this case, slashed. Some of you may recall that Until Dawn actually started life as a PS Triple Ballin' exclusive, and also exclusively used the Move controllers. Do any of you non-PS VR fans remember those things? Well, wait, do you remember this guy?
I used to own a PS3 and I don't even remember. I meant to say is I own a PS3 and I never used one of those things.
Hey. Anyway, there's plenty of meat on these bones for us to dissect, so grab your flashlights and put on your parkas. It's time to find out what happened to Until Dawn.
Should have paid more attention in climbing class.
So as mentioned, when Until Dawn was first announced for the PS3 all the way back at Gamescom 2012, it was massively different from what would eventually release on the PS4 in 2015. UK-based Supermassive Games had originally envisioned it as a pretty standard first-person horror game. It was originally built around the PlayStation Move, and as such, would feature hand-based puzzle-solving, item collecting, and even gunplay. You could also freely roam around each level, investigating scenes at your leisure while using the Move controllers to point your flashlight in whatever direction, similar to Wii horror experiences like Silent Hill.
Am I dead? No, I think I'm alive. Ugh. Ugh.
Shattered Memories, and of course, the seminal classic, Escape from Bug Island. But before I get ahead of myself, which I sometimes do, let's go back just a bit further. While Supermassive Games is credited as the main studio who developed Until Dawn, it wasn't always so. I had a chance to speak with Graham Resnick, a horror writer who was hired to co-write Until Dawn's script and would also go on to help pen most of their later games. Graham graciously shared some information about the origins of Until Dawn and how they go back even further than most realize. I don't actually know too much about the original origins of the game beyond that it was a title with another studio, possibly first party with Sony, before it ended up at Supermassive. But once it got to Supermassive, the only thing it truly shared with the original version, as far as I know, was a very loose concept: teenagers, lodge/cabin, mountain, horror, which doesn't seem like a lot to go on, but in 2010, 2011 or so, doing a teen slasher game was definitely something pretty off the beaten path. Supermassive took the loose concept and created their own unique story and set of characters. Digging through footage of the early build that's been floating around out there, and believe me, there's a lot, reveals that at one point Sony's London studio logo appeared during the intro, with no sign of Supermassives at all. Said London studio had become specialists in PlayStation accessories, starting with the iToy back on the PS2, and they also shipped a huge amount of move-only games on the PS3, so they, being the original developers, makes total sense. While we don't know exactly why the project was moved around, London Studio had a super packed slate at that time. Dozens of SingStar games, 2 iPads, a PSVR launch title later on, plus the first 3 Wonderbook games, and shipped them all within a single year. Anyways, they were obviously quite busy, so they need someone else to pass the Until Dawn torch to, hence Supermassive Games. Now, you'd be forgiven for thinking Supermassive might not have been the best choice, as up until then, they were best known for various pieces of Little Big Planet DLC, including Sackboy's prehistoric moves, and the 4th Wonderbook game, Walking with Dinosaurs, something I just found out existed. So, with that context, it makes sense that with such a variety of shipped projects, PlayStation Move experience, and their proximity with the London studio via the Wonderbook series, they were a pretty good fit. On top of that, Graham shared with me why he felt Supermassive were the ones who would do Until Dawn's concept justice. I can say that once I got to know Will Biles and Pete Samuels and many of the other folks at Supermassive, it was very clear why they were the ones to take on this project. They're huge horror fans, and they were dedicated to making it the best video game a horror fan could want. In the 2000s and early 2010s, horror games and movies were pretty dominated by action, zombies, etc. It was still a big part of horror, but at the time, doing something that was not about action would feel like a movie you could play, seemed like a novel concept, and Supermassive was relentlessly passionate about making it work and convincing people it would work, despite a lot of initial skepticism surrounding the project. One of the issues the team encountered in this early PS3 version was that the first-person setup wasn't as good as directing the player through the story as a fixed camera setup could be. Players could just walk away from characters who were speaking to them, and it wasn't as easy to force players to head in the desired direction. Because of this, Graham told me that the game featured far more quote-unquote nag lines and barks, presumably to help pull the player away from looking at suspicious rocks. Graham also shared that he remembers writing over 100 lines of dialogue just for when you blasted a character's eyes with their flashlight. What's more is that this was Supermassive's first big narrative game, and they were inheriting a workflow from another studio to boot. Graham recalled how this resulted in him having to use Excel to organize thousands of lines of dialogue, and that it was such a massive headache for them that Supermassive actually developed their own proprietary tools for their later titles. Although we're not privy to any technical or programming issues the team might have struggled with, and despite the leaked PS3 gameplay looking really solid, there were still some very big changes coming around the frigid corner.
Hello? What's going on out there?
You aren't just one you. There are many sides to you.
Oh, right, ad.
And every one of them.
By the end of 2013, Until Dawn was—
Sorry, for the moment as you're playing, my brain was like turn off for a split second.
is essentially finished, and even though it was scheduled to launch on the PS3 by the—
I might be still feeling a little out of it, having not much sleep last night. Okay.
end of that year, both Supermassive and Sony had remained tight-lipped about its progress. This is because there was a big shift happening behind the scenes, but before this shift could be communicated to the public, news got out to several publications that Until Dawn was getting the metaphorical axe and was being cancelled outright. This is because that December, Amazon customer support sent out an email informing early buyers that their pre-orders for Until Dawn were no longer going to be fulfilled, as they had been told it was being canned. Of course, technically, this was actually completely true. The PS3 version of Until Dawn was being cancelled. That said, fans and reporters began jumping to conclusions, and so Supermassive Managing Director Pete Samuels would pop up to set the record straight. It's clearly not planned to be a 2013 release any longer, and I'm hoping and expecting to be able to say more in the new year, but that's really all I'm able to say right now. With all the money and time already invested, releasing the game as a move-only title on the PS3 in 2014 would have been just as good as killing its cast of 18 to 20-something-year-olds themselves. Evidently, the decision was made to move the entire project over to the PS4, as it would benefit the type of storytelling they were hoping to achieve. We do know this switch was made easier by Guerrilla Games' proprietary internal engine, which functions smoothly on both the PS3 and PS4, as evidenced by footage of the leaked prototype build still having residual Killzone 3 assets. So there's probably a fair chance that Guerrilla at the very least provided support in the PS3 to PS4 transplant. It also meant that during this time, the once unnamed internal Guerrilla Games engine turned into Hideo Kojima's tech of choice, Decima. With that said, it's crazy that such a massive amount of footage from the unfinished PS3 build leaked onto the internet, and judging from—
That means Until Dawn and Death Stranding are almost like sibling titles, because they come from like sort of the same engine.
Said footage, it looked great and seemed to perform quite smoothly. Therefore, it's fair to assume that the Switch was made for marketing reasons rather than debilitating tech problems. Graham corroborated this for me when I asked if this was the case. Correct, unless there's more to the story than I'm aware, this has always been my understanding. It feels a little weird to see it listed sometimes as a cancelled game when really it just had a midstream metamorphosis. Work never properly stopped on it or anything. The PS4 technology made it possible in a way that felt much more in line with Until Dawn's concept, so it was reworked in every way that could take advantage of that. With the big delay, this meant Supermassive can now take the time to see what it could improve in the switch to the PS4, with the biggest one being the game's perspective. I think there were two main things that shifted the narrative in that regard and drove the redesign, moving away from first person into fixed camera angles, which allowed the narrative to be told through shots and edits, which is much more cinematic than the free roam first person, and the high resolution facial capture, which allowed Larry and I, as writers, to express ideas and thoughts exactly how we would in a movie, by letting the actors' performances do the heavy lifting that only they can do. I also asked Graham about something every studio and game developer knows all too well, the dusty regrets of the cutting room floor. Between all the different builds of the game, the hundreds upon hundreds of pages of dialogue, and mid-development console swapping, some things had to be dropped or simplified. One such element that Graham was sad to see go was the game's 3D TV support, a feature that Sony had been pushing hard near the twilight years of the PS3, and a feature that they—
Yeah, 3D was also kind of a hot trend during like, I want to say like somewhere in the early to mid 2010s until it really until we realized it was kind of gimmicky. It's kind of the history of 3D is kind of an interesting one because I want to say it started out somewhere in the 80s and people really liked it, but then it just kind of stopped being a thing. And then it came back being a thing thanks to James Cameron Avatar, and then now it's like, now who really cares about 3D? I mean, I think we're still doing it, but at the same time, it's like it became like less of a selling point.
It dropped just as hard when the 3D TV bubble burst. In terms of content, one big change was the opening scene, which focused on Hannah and Beth. It was originally much longer and more drawn out, but they felt ultimately that it hurt the pacing of the game a bit, so the sequence was cut down to the bare essentials. Ashley, one of the more inquisitive and serious characters seen in the final version, also started out as pretty much an entirely different person. In the PS3 version of the game, Ashley was an overly anxious, workaholic pill popper who had a vivid, nearly split personality persona straight out of Agatha Christie named Mrs. Merriweather, who she would recede into under duress. Ashley would of course lose the split personality during the subsequent rewrites, though Graham also explained that in general, many of the characters who were a bit too over the top were adjusted to make for a more grounded cast. Well, as grounded as these characters could be.
Hashtag there's a freaking ghost after us! Crack a dictionary much, biatch?
Looky. Who's gonna fight?
Yeah, they were still a little bit campy, but I guess they would have been like more campy in the other version.
Fire up some nookie.
Speaking of characters, when the game moved over to the PS4, performance capture was making massive strides in producing even more nuance and believability within the medium, and wanting to leverage that further, much of the PS3 cast was replaced with actors who fans might better recognize. Brett Dalton of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Until Dawn fame was one of the few that were
not quite the
Switch.
repertoire that guy has.
Find, he remembers the experience rather fondly and recalls a particularly intense audition process. The story with that is that they held legit auditions. It wasn't just a voiceover thing. You were actually using the space, all of that stuff. They were throwing things at you during the audition. I want to say just throwing ideas, but I felt like, and maybe I'm just misremembering this, but I think they actually did throw things. Maybe it was just ideas, like, oh, there's a deer head now, coming at you. When I asked Graham about this, he said, chuckling, I cannot confirm or deny that any deer heads, living or dead, were thrown at the actors.
Imagine if you were attending an audition and they just start throwing like the heads of dead animals at you. What kind of freaks are you going to be working for? I'm here to act in your movie. Okay, how do you feel about dealing with dead monkey heads? What? Oh, you don't like dead monkey heads? We can go for like the heads of dead dogs or dead horse heads. You like horse heads?
When Until Dawn was finally re-unveiled to the public, the glow-up to the PS4 was, needless to say, rather stunning. The extra 2 years of development overhauling the facial capture, the graphical fidelity, and the cinematic presentation really helped it stand out in an era where Telltale was still the standard for choice-based narrative games. It also didn't hurt that it no longer required players to buy a set of Move controllers to play it. Just a new console, which is somehow still a better deal? When it was released in August of 2015, reviews were pretty positive, maintaining a 79 average on Metacritic with over 100 reviews, in addition to an even higher user score, with the only negatives being Emily! Fans really got into the story and characters, and the well-executed twists and turns really elevated the experience for many. Very quickly, Until Dawn found an unexpected, almost viral popularity on both Twitch and YouTube, despite being positioned as more of a mid-tier summer release. It seemed at that time like Supermassive and Sony had an absolute hit on their hands. The game would place 7th in the August NPD charts, with Sony's then president Shuhei Yoshida proclaiming it a sleeper hit. while Supermassive's own Pete Samuels said it surpassed their expectations. Although specific, credible worldwide sales data for Until Dawn isn't really available, it seemed both publisher and developer were satisfied with its performance, but it is curious that there was never any braggy press releases or tweets trumpeting its success. Sony and Supermassive continued to work together on a number of titles, like Hidden Agenda, which was probably the most interesting game in Sony's ill-fated PlayLink program, and 3 all-new VR games, the less-than-ideal Bravo team, the well-received Rail...
Wait, hold on. Hold on. Shoot, that's not what I want to do. Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Let me go back a bit. Just in case. I thought I disconnected, but I guess I didn't.
Probably the most interesting game in Sony's ill-fated PlayLink program, and 3 all-new VR games, the less-than-ideal Bravo team, the well-received rail shooter Until Dawn Rush.
Sorry to get off topic for a bit, but again, I'm surprised I have not disconnected a single time. I'm honestly kind of happy, but at the same time a little annoyed that it seems to only happen when I play a game. When I'm not and just doing this, I don't seem to have any disconnection problems. I think.
Blood, and the less than well-received The Inpatient. Bravo team staff would eventually speak out in a Eurogamer article about how Until Dawn's success had the studio management suddenly imposing all sorts of arbitrary changes for the game in order to chase the so-called Hollywood realism that had brought them success with Until Dawn. Beyond that, there's a rumor that Supermassive were recently working on a Killzone VR game, but that Sony handed the game off to another studio due to dissatisfaction with the project. And that's pretty much it for Supermassive and Sony's partnership. Namco
and a little bit of Killzone.
Bandai, meanwhile, proceeded to repeat their legally distinct successor series to a surprising Sony hit title by signing Supermassive over to a lucrative 8-game contract for the Dark Pictures anthology. Outside of that, the studio would also find the time to make the smaller-scale Shattered State, as well as the even closer to Until Dawn horror title, The Quarry. As for why Sony never saw fit to release a more traditional Until Dawn sequel, well, Graham chimes in once more. I don't have all the details on the ins and outs, but I think the game did very well enough to get those spin-offs greenlit at least. Lack of a literal Until Dawn 2 could be for a variety of reasons, but it's Sony's IP, so in the end, it's not something Supermassive could control. As for the future of Until Dawn, well, recent rumors have swirled about a possible remake of the game, but otherwise, we don't really know anything concrete. That said, Supermassive is still absolutely in the business of providing fans with what they've come to expect, and while their newer horror titles haven't quite hit the same highs as the original Until Dawn did in 2015, the studio's love for the genre obviously managed to stay alive. Graham Resnick, meanwhile, looks back on the last decade of working on horror games extremely warmly, saying, "There is literally nothing better to me as a writer than knowing that there are people out there who quote/meme the insane stuff I made up late at night on a drunk Skype session with Larry, or put Jesus hot sauce Christmas cake on a t-shirt, or climbing class, or peanut butter pops." It's truly bananas and really does make spending millions of hours of my life writing 5,000 to 10,000 pages of hot nonsense per game totally and completely worth it. Thanks again so much, Graham, for taking the time to talk to me about Until Dawn. And if you out there know of any other games or movies you'd like me to slash up next, let me know in the comments below or brave the dank mountain cave that is my Twitter. See you next time, and thanks for watching!
Oh, whoops. Meant to find a playlist. Oh yeah, I guess a little bit about that Dark Pictures anthology, something like that. I don't like compared to Until Dawn, I don't think they were received quite as well. Like they were mostly kind of like a mixed bag of like different like yeah, they were kind of like a mixed bag, that's all I can say. Unlike the Quarry, which is like which I feel like is probably like the closest thing we're gonna get to Until Dawn 2. And in fact, the Quarry I want to say is kind of superior. It's kind of superior to Until Dawn, just because like, well, maybe not superior, but one aspect I really did like because I did saw a stream of someone playing that game a while back. While Until Dawn had Wendigos, the Quarry, I think it's the Quarry, had a frick, what were they called? Werewolves. They had actual werewolves. And Until Dawn's introduction to Wendigos was kind of a bit jarring. Like they couldn't really like it seemed like it kind of struggled trying to how to incorporate the supernatural element that's like more cleanly, I want to say. Like it just feels like it just comes out of the left field, while the Quarry feels like it was able to ease into the supernatural elements a lot more smoother compared to Until Dawn. Maybe I also have a bit of a bias because I also really like werewolves. Oh, whoops, wrong button. Nope. That's not what I wanted to click on. There we go. Yeah, I'm curious about this one. Resident Evil 1.5/2. That name sounds like something for a Kingdom Hearts game. I'm sorry, I just kind of realized this is kind of a funny way to pause it with this really bizarre, with this really awkward close-up of Randy Pitchford.
Hey, welcome to What Happened, the show that has over 5 hours of Capcom-based content across over a dozen videos. How about we shift gears and cover one of their riskier ventures that wound up being one of their biggest successes? You know, as a little treat. 1998's Resident Evil 2 is regarded as one of the titles that actually elevated Capcom's standing within the
I just realized that while I was not able to play any spooky games, I'm at least watching videos about spooky games. That's kind of something, right?
Industry at large, and was probably one of the main reasons they started shifting resources and teams away from the arcades and onto console development. Resident Evil had been a surprise hit, and the sequel was expected to follow that up with gusto. As it turns out though, there was a significant period of time where the game was failing to impress even those within Capcom, with some staff feeling that it was a bland, disjointed mess that was failing to recognize the elements that made the first game so memorable. So grab your herb mixtures and stock up at Kendo's. It's time to find out what happened to Resident Evil 2.
Hold your fire! I'm a human!
To properly tell this tale, we have to start by going over the state of Capcom in the mid-90s. Enter Tokoru Fujiwara. He was the director of classic Capcom arcade games like Puyan and Vulgus, and would eventually become the head of console development at Capcom in 1988. In 1993, he would begin production on a horror game that would harken back to one of his earlier projects, 1989's Sweet Home. One of his tasks was to put together the team that would go on to create this new world of horror.
Wait, hold on, actually.
That would go on to create this new world of earlier projects.
Sweet Home was a very interesting game because aside from being like another movie license title, one actually based on a Japanese movie, it's kind of like a blending between like a role playing game, like you know you have like your turn based style combat whenever you come across an enemy, and being sort of like a survival horror thing. Like, for example, if one of your party mates die, that might be it for them. I think you might be able to bring them back, but yeah, if they die, they die. Like, there's no way to just revive them with like a Phoenix down or something.
89's Sweet Home. One of his tasks was to put together the team that would go on to create this new world of horror, placing Shinji Mikami, designer of both Goof Troop and Capcom's Aladdin, in the role of director.
Clearly the perfect choice for horror games. And I'm being very sincere with that one. Like, it's probably like, if you're gonna have like a team, if you're gonna get like a team to make horror games, you best make sure one actually has like a very low threshold when it comes to scary stuff.
Fujiwara had approached Mikami by asking him if he hated being scared, and it was apparently Mikami's earnest answer of yes that cemented Fujiwara's decision. Jumping ahead a few years, just as Resident Evil / Biohazard was wrapping up during the tail end of 1995, Fujiwara left the company, feeling that Capcom was headed for Sequel City while he still wanted to make original games. While he considered his experience working on Resident Evil a breath of fresh air, he gave Capcom his notice before it would reach its blockbuster status. Another key departure from the original team was Kenichi Iwao, a very much unsung hero when it comes to the first game. He was the scenario writer, and he came up with a huge amount of Resident Evil staples that are still used today. I'm talking about concepts like the T-Virus, zombies, bioweapons, the Special Tactics and Rescue Squad, better known as... Thank you. Stars. Just about everything that made Resident Evil, Resident Evil. Hell, he even wrote the Itchy Tasty diary entry. After departing Capcom, he joined up with Square Enix, where he wrote and directed Parasite Eve 2. Perhaps not his best work, but he did eventually move to greener, more fantasy-filled pastures. As we all know, the original Resident Evil chilled the blood of many a PlayStation owner, with the game selling over 2.75 million copies, and millions more if you consider the other editions. But with Fujiwara and Iwao now gone, a new team would need to be assembled to start work on the follow-up. Mikami, funnily enough, inherited Fujiwara's role, becoming the producer/manager for the sequel. He then chose plucky 25-year-old Hideki Kamiya to fill the director's chair, despite him having no experience in that role. Now, this wasn't as random of a pick as you might think. Kamiya had actually designed some rooms in the Spencer estate, and is also credited with coming up for the names for most of the main STARS members. A lot of the information in this video comes from Alex Aniel's fantastic book, Itchy Tasty, An Unofficial History of Resident Evil, link in the description, and in it comes this amazing recollection from Kamiya about how Mikami approached him. You're the dark horse of the new recruits. You're either going to fail spectacularly, or you're going to be a huge success. This was said because Kamiya, just like his boss a few years previously, had reservations about directing a horror game, as he also wasn't the biggest fan of the genre in general. But with Mikami's confidence in his abilities, Kamiya accepted, despite the monumental pressure that was already going to be on him and the rest of the team. Capcom had built a reputation on making some pretty successful sequels, so the team received their mandate.
I say so.
Surpass the first Resident Evil in every way possible. Quick PSA, the following is my own footage of the leaked build of the early prototype of RE2, and if you hit the link in the description, it'll bring you to my new gameplay channel, Flophouse Plays. Over there you can check out the full video of me messing around in this weird version of the RPD building you all know and love. Anyway, since Kamiya wasn't terribly interested in horror, his first inclination was to have the sequel skew towards constant action, more set pieces, explosions, ammo, weapons, and more enemies on screen to boot. Kamiya had also wanted to not be beholden.
Yeah, Kamiya was really a guy that was more interested in making more action games, hence his experience with I mean, since he was like one of the key figures at Platinum, who are best known for making a bunch of really fun action games. I don't know what games he was directly involved with. Like, I know there's Devil May Cry, and then there's Bayonetta. He might have had some involvement with some other ones, but it was like, oh, maybe The Wonderful 101. I think he might have some involvement with that one too.
Into the story of the first game, and thus he created a brand new cast of characters with zero links to the surviving STARS members. These new playable heroes would be a rookie cop by the name of Leon, Mr. Kennedy if you're nasty, and motorcycle enthusiast Elza Walker. The only real big connection to the first game was the setting.
Interesting to have have like some kind of racer to be like your protagonist in a zombie survival game. That's what I have a problem with. It's just like, I don't know, I just find the contrast kind of amusing. Like, the police officer makes sense. The racer, maybe a little less so. I mean, heck, when they introduced Claire, she was almost kind of like a biker chick.
Raccoon City, the sleepy little town that was right in the middle of the T-Virus splash zone. Umbrella, do you have any comment as to why this is happening?
No comment.
With the team formed and the scenario locked in, Capcom was quick to announce to the press that a sequel was in full production and would be completed by spring of 1997 at the latest. Fans were already salivating at the idea, as survival horror had exploded with RE1's success, with lots of copycats already on the way. A lot of anticipation was building a lot quickly, which put even more pressure on Kamiya and the team. In addition, Capcom were banking hard on RE2 as well, as the high profits of Street Fighter II and its many arcade sequels were fading off by this point. The success of the first Resident Evil had gotten the execs to take notice, and if RE2 could prove to be an even bigger success, the publisher's entire business strategy would pivot. So Kamiya, good luck, and don't fuck it up.
Welcome to Osage. Most fellas out here are crooked.
Come on, come on, come on. There we go. I need to be a little bit more point on that.
The team worked hard throughout 1996, building not just a singular mansion, but almost an entire town, as the horror would now infect several locations within Raccoon City, with the RPD station being the star of the show. Mikami had complete faith in the new direction the team were headed towards, and he let Kamiya complete his vision, which by the end of 1996 was reportedly about 70% complete. However, all console games needed to be evaluated by Yoshiki Okamoto, who took over from Fujiwara after he had left, and it was from him that final approval needed to be given before the team could start polishing and wrapping things up. The first game had also apparently been a little rough when it was handed over to Okamoto for approval, and only got said approval after a number of changes he had wanted to see had been implemented. As it turns out, however, he was thrilled with what the team had come up with for Resident Evil 2 and gave them an enthusiastic thumbs up. Which is something I would be saying to you if this wasn't what happened. Okamoto, in fact, was not a fan of what Kamiya had done. The extra emphasis on action, the brighter color palette, the game's lack of scares, and even the story all dissatisfied him, and major changes would be necessary for the game to get the all clear. While it might have been possible to let the gameplay changes slide, it was clear to Okamoto that Kamiya's storytelling was the real issue, and that his inexperience in writing wasn't something that could be easily fixed or ignored. Unlike Street Fighter or Ghosts and Goblins, story was pretty integral to the appeal of Resident Evil, and Kamiya's attempt seemed to have fallen far short of what was expected, with Okamoto apparently feeling it was subpar, uninteresting, and the game as a whole lacked originality. Unfortunately, since Iwao had left, there wasn't an experienced writer on staff who could quickly take up the reins, so extraordinary times called for extraordinary measures. Capcom looked outside the company and brought aboard the late Noboru Sugimura, an acclaimed television writer who had worked on series including Super Sentai and Kamen Rider, to see if he could help. Capcom had
interesting choice, since I just mentioned that Hideki Kamiya, I think he was the one that was directly involved with creation of The Wonderful 101, which definitely has that sort of tokusatsu superhero feel. And apparently they got this guy who actually did work on Kamen Rider stuff in Super Sentai to work on their to work on their spooky, I mean, their horror action game. I don't know, I just find I find it kind of amusing. It's like, what do they end up really changing with that kind of approach? I mean, I'm pretty sure they changed a whole lot. Just like, I just like finding these kind of connections.
Sugimura play through the incomplete build, and once finished, he suggested a lot of changes. He told Kamiya that the idea of a direct sequel having almost no connection to the story of the first game was a massive mistake which absolutely needed to be rectified. He also felt the game lacked tension and the characters had almost zero depth to them, and since these aspects were fundamental to the experience, he suggested everything be scrapped and to start over from square one.
Sorry, but it looks like your party has been cancelled.
Both Kamiya and Mikami were unsure if this was the right course of action, and since they already had mountains of pressure piling up, such a decision couldn't be made lightly. They thanked Sugimura for his advice and decided to weigh their options. Junking absolutely everything was a bit extreme, but at the same time, they both knew that Sugimura had made valid points, with Kamiya taking these criticisms to heart. They eventually came to determination. If respected creators like Okamoto and Sugimura were reaching the same dissatisfied conclusions for the same reasons, the best choice was to start over and try again. Okamoto also agreed with this course of action. All three of them brought this proposal back to the Capcom bigwigs, estimating that they would need an entire extra year to make a truly worthy follow-up. God, they must have been shitting their asses during this meeting. Fortunately though, this extension was granted. While delaying a game they had previously announced as almost done was a big risk, they knew they had to get this right. It had to blow the first Resident Evil away. As per Alex's book, when asked what he felt about scrapping so much work, Kamiya said, in his most Kamiya way, "It truly was a piece of shit. It was boring, devoid of vision, and a poor excuse for a horror game. To be honest, I was actually relieved when we cancelled the game. It was my first time sitting in the director's seat, so I was quite inexperienced. Another thing that contributed to the failure of the game was my lack of vision. I do not usually have a specific vision going into a project. I like to experiment and see what sticks." While the two lead
It's kind of interesting hearing that from like game developers. I usually hear stuff like that all the time with like content creators or artists, where they look back at their older stuff and how much they cringe at it.
Leads were confident this was the right thing to do, the rest of the team's morale sunk to an all-time low. A whole year of work, mostly down the blood-stained toilet. Things got bad enough that a few staff members apparently even approached Mikami asking that Hideki Kamiya get demoted from his directorial role. These requests fell not just on deaf ears, but like angry ears. It was reported that Mikami would redirect the complaint and ask, "Well, why don't you direct the game then?" Which tended to
"Oh yeah, why don't you direct it, smirk eye? Huh?
to shut everybody up. The team then filed away the scrap version as a prototype, dubbed Resident Evil 1.5, indicating simply that the development occurred between the first and second games. It wasn't all for naught though. Parts of the prototype's code were used in Onimusha, which started life as a PS1 game before eventually migrating onto the PS Double Ballin'. The delay did give Capcom marketing a decent idea. To tide over the fans disappointed over the extra year they need to wait, why not throw them a bone with a director's cut of the first game? Or better yet, a version with DualShock support and a little bit of footage of Resident Evil 1.5 as a bonus. One thing though, if you are gonna play this game, you're gonna have to put up with
the famous Resident Evil music I've been hearing so much about. Pleasant.
Okamoto felt that if they were going to do this right, they should also bring Sugimura closer to the development, as the story was now seen as being paramount to its success. Sugimura was happy to lend a hand and did feel there were two main narrative aspects that could be salvaged from 1.5. Firstly, most of the characters. I say most because Sugimura insisted that one of the playable heroes needed a direct link to the first game. Thus, Elza Walker became Claire of the Redfield clan, famous for their boulder punching prowess. The second aspect Sugimura felt they should keep was Raccoon City, and more specifically the police department, but it would need some serious remodeling. In 1.5, it was a maze of plain offices and nondescript hallways that were lacking in terms of atmosphere. Sugimura suggested that the building's origins should be rewritten to have been a museum before being turned into police headquarters, which would add a ton more character, mystery, and be a convenient excuse for the many bizarre puzzles and artwork adorning the walls. The playable scenarios for each character have been closely modeled after RE1 up to this point, but both Kamiya and Sugimura decided they could be greatly expanded upon. Together, they devised RE2's unique zapping system, where completing the scenarios in different orders would lead to unique events, and thus more replay value. With the extra time, the team are also able to make substantial upgrades to the visuals, adding more gore and variety to the enemies, as well as a ton of extra environmental detail. They also incorporated tons of high-quality CGI animation, a big step up from the first game's more frugal approach. Sugimura also left his mark in more direct ways, expanding the roles of supporting
awesome. I know what you're talking about.
Sherry, and came up with the concept of the G-Virus and its various gross mutations. While the first game was limited in emotional depth, he was able to dramatically improve the character's abilities to express a broader array of emotions, such as love.
I see you don't have a lifeguard here at your beach.
I'm not at the beach, this is a bathtub.
There was just one last major issue that cropped up just as the game was being completed. At the very tail end of development, where everything was locked in, a member of the team noticed that they had made a mistake in the way they tracked the size of the game's audio files, and realized that the total audio data surpassed what could be held on a single PlayStation CD. Now, they could take the time to try and fix the issue, but the game was already behind schedule, and while Capcom upper management was not happy with this news, they decided they would simply take the financial hit on a double-sized 2-disc jewel case, even though the developers probably could have squeezed it all into one disc. The flip side of this mistake was that in terms of marketing, it played well to fans. It only increased the hype and mystique for Resident Evil 2, making it seem far bigger than the first game and well worth waiting for. This is something Capcom would try to replicate with Devil May Cry 2 to much worse results. Fortunately, it was well worth it in the end. The delay only built the hype up even more, so when it was finally released on the PlayStation in January 1998, fans were ravenous to experience the next evolution in survival horror. Capcom's sales expectations were very high for the 1990s, as they hoped to sell 2 million copies in a relatively short period. But thankfully, that goal was smashed and then some. It sold 1.4 million copies in Japan in just 4 days, something typically reserved for the likes of major RPGs, and North America wasn't far behind. When it was all said and done, the two PlayStation releases totaled over 4.96 million units, with further ports of the game bringing it comfortably past the 6 million unit line. Besides the commercial success, the reviews and impressions from fans were outrageously positive, further cementing Resident Evil as the undeniable king of survival horror. Better luck next time, Countdown Vampires!
I thought he was gonna say Silent Hill.
What's going on?
This success, thankfully, also benefited the actual staff. After the splashy release of RE1, Shinji Mikami had complained that despite it selling millions of copies, he and his team saw no additional financial gain, and his meager salary had forced him to postpone marriage plans at the time. RE2's blockbuster success changed all this, as Capcom instituted an incentive-based bonus system based on a game's performance, so the entire team saw some actual dividends from their hard work. Not only that, Okamoto had seen how important a fleshed-out story could be for future cinematic console experiences. During the game's development, he and Sugimura founded Flagship Co. Limited, a Capcom subsidiary that specialized in the development of video game stories and writing. They would be involved with a number of Resident Evil, Onimusha, and Dino Crisis titles, in addition to a handful of Kirby and Zelda games, oddly enough. With RE2 becoming one of the biggest games that year, Resident Evil as a franchise became Capcom's priority and got shuffled in a variety of fun and interesting ways. Several different follow-ups were in development, with the first eventually shipping as Code Veronica, while the second was a Kamiya-directed PS1 game that took place on a cruise ship. Meanwhile, what started as an RE2 spin-off featuring the star's biggest fan would end up getting promoted into the actual Resident Evil 3, as that game was already deep in development, and it was felt that Kamiya and his team should move on to the PS2, which was just around the corner. Once all that dust was settled, they would begin work on Resident Evil 4, which didn't quite go the way most were expecting it to, like, at all, but that's a tale for another time. If you know of any other salvageable survivors of
I really want to know the history of, like, how...
let me know in the comments below.
Devil May Cry originally started out as, like, a proposed sequel for Resident Evil 4. No, I mean, like, it was going to be Resident Evil 4, but because, like, how much it kind of steer too far from like how Resident Evil is usually done, but I guess since they still like how it looked, they were like, okay, it can't be a Resident Evil game, but it can be a game. When you think about Devil May, like, I know like both Devil May Cry and Resident Evil are owned by the same company, but I guess Resident Evil and Devil May Cry in particular has this very special bond, since, you know, if there wasn't a Resident Evil, there probably wouldn't be a Devil May Cry. In a way, they're almost like a sibling series. I'm just trying to see what other game I can look up on. Oh, Alan Wake. Wait, hold on. Is there something going on with the quality? Yeah, it went down to 480. I usually have it up to like 720p. I think that's a good enough one.
Welcome back to What Happened, the show in which I was always going to write an episode about Alan Wake for, but held off just long enough that Remedy eventually announced a sparkling new remaster that everyone can enjoy. Boy, I can't wait to tackle Rival School soon! Rival School Capcom? Why do I even bother? Anyway, most of you should be familiar with Max Payne,
maybe one day,
Quantum,
Matt.
And all
maybe
the slow-mo diving and shoot-banging powers of the greater Remedy-verse. Out of all of their games, though, the longest and most ominous shadow fell on Alan Wake, which had an arduous, almost 6-year development cycle fraught with doubt, uncertainty, and a reset of its entire structure. And with that aforementioned remaster out, it's as good a time as any to revisit one of the Finnish company's most unique and important titles. So slip on your tweed jacket, grab your thermos of coffee, and let's shed some light on what happened to Alan Wake.
I'm a writer.
It's 2003 and Remedy Entertainment has just completed Max Payne 2, The Fall of Max Payne, featuring Max Payne. And while it was more of an iterative sequel,
featuring Max Payne for the Max Payne series.
In regards to technology. Personally, I remember seeing the physics-based mayhem and going, wow, graphics can't get any better than this. And they never did. Anyway, the studio was riding into high, but after 7 years of wandering the dreary, noir-filled streets of New York, they were looking to do something different for their next venture, and thus spent more than a year dreaming up ideas, settings, and genres. This period of exploration truly ran the gamut and produced some wild stuff that you'd never associate with the studio given their past or future work for that matter. One such idea was a comedic game that took place within a fantasy world. Think more Terry Pratchett instead of Frank Miller. And while the idea didn't last for very long, one element to its design did: darkness and light. The idea of playing with opposite ends of that spectrum was one of the earliest connective tissues that Remedy latched onto, from the concepting phase all the way to completion. They wanted to focus less on your typical gruff anti-hero like Marky Mark Payne, and more on an everyman, an author in this case, and landed on the name Alan Wake relatively early on. By the start of 2005, they had honed in on the setting, a quaint northwest town named Bright Falls, populated with an eclectic cast of characters and filled with forbidden closets of mysteries.
I don't know what the music they're using is from, but I really want to jam to it.
That feels eerily similar to Twin Peaks, well, that's because it is. Remedy was pretty clear that the seminal 90s dramedy was a huge influence on the game.
This is, excuse me, a damn fine cup of coffee.
There was, however, one major difference in this early version of Alan Wake compared to the game we know today, and that was its structure. In 2005, Bright Falls was going to be an entirely open, free-roaming world that the player could explore. At their peak, Remedy only had...
Maybe it's just me, but it's kind of funny how it's starting to look a little bit like Deadly Premonition.
55 full-time employees, which was woefully low compared to what you need to make a sandbox game at that time, and staffing up just to throw bodies at the problem wasn't really Remedy's MO. Thus, the technology team hunkered down for months and months, figuring out how the studio could build a lot of game a lot of quickly. What they came up with was a specific set of engine tools which were built off Max Payne 2's Max Ed level editor, which would allow the team to create vast amounts of game world without having to laboriously place every single bush or tree stump. Former Remedy head Oskari Häkkinen explained, "An unconventional game requires unconventional tools. We spent lots of effort in the early stages of development creating biotypes that mesh together based off the research photos we took. Now, if we place a road in the middle of the world, for instance, the system automatically knows to put trees or grass on the road. It also automatically generates sprouts of grass coming from the edges of the tarmac and ensures that the grass type is in line with the vegetation surrounding the road. In addition to that, it'll add gravel and a ditch on the sides of the road. The effort put into making these systems work saved us time later, as no post-editing was needed, and they allowed our artists to work very efficiently."
Basically, they found a way to make sure they don't have to tediously just figure out where each tree should go to.
Right, the research photos. Finland is very different from the Pacific Northwest, obviously, so the team flew out to Washington State, Oregon, and British Columbia to take over 60,000 photos of diners, lakes, and towns, and even camped out in forests overnight to paint an accurate picture of the region.
These are some fantastic
All of this
shots,
was done
by
to
the way.
flesh out the world of Bright Falls, in which Wake could follow the main story path, or P could get into a car and drive to a logging camp, find collectibles, visit restaurants, and avoid eye contact with his fans. It was up to the player, and everything was governed by a dynamic day and night cycle, which of course played into the game's themes. Even at this early stage, the project was looking really impressive, pushing the physics-based systems of Max Payne 2 even further, like logs realistically rolling down a hill. Remedy was feeling confident with what they had and decided to put together a demo for a behind-closed-doors presentation at E3 2005. And this is where the hype machine for Alan Wake slowly started to awaken. The press and potential publishers were all
Hey, you
duly
got a
impressed,
point for
as the
me
game
for that
stood
one.
out compared to typical open world fare. It was a dark thriller with a unique hero. It was nestled in forests, lakes, and cabins rarely seen in video games at that point. While several big publishers had shown interest, Remedy went with Microsoft, with one of the chief reasons being that the IP would ultimately belong to them and not the electronics giant, at least not indefinitely, which is why the recent remaster is even possible. Once Daddy Gates' deep pockets were opened up though, Remedy got to work in earnest, building out content, locations, and missions, basically filling Bright Falls with things to do. Slowly though, over the course of 2005, 2006, all the way to 2008, a deep, uncomfortable feeling started welling up in the back of the team's skull. A dark, inky, nagging thing that kept echoing through their collective mind palaces until they could no longer ignore its warning. They had built the game completely wrong.
Oh, shoot.
Now streaming, Loki is back. Wow!
Having a game incomplete is one thing. Just making the game completely wrong sounds way more messed up.
Originally, the day and night cycle pushed two sides.
The game was literally built different. Yeah, the game was like literally built different. It was built. It was like built without this, without all the parameters. It should not have existed. It needs to be taken out of back and put out its own misery.
Of gameplay. During the day, Alan could talk to NPCs, gather clues, and start amassing resources which would be invaluable during the night, where combat would finally kick off. Sam, do the Max Payne face Lake, detailed this process in an interview with Game Informer. When you say night is coming and night brings trouble, it starts to mean the player wants to prepare for nightfall. We had elements where you are driving around in this open world looking for a generator, looking for portable light sources, looking for gasoline for the generator, and then you are setting up a camp and preparing for the nightfall. Also, with the NPCs, we found ourselves in a situation wondering, does it make sense to have NPCs around? This is one of those elements that started to make less and less sense for the team as they built the game's structure and tried to balance its pacing. The main thrust of the story was finding Alan's absconded wife, and when giving the player absolute freedom, that story was robbed of its urgency. When you look at Remedy's history, it's always been clear that story was a driving force for the action. So, if they felt that it was starting to slip into the background, well, that's a fair concern, one that Oscari also shared. A thriller is very much like a roller coaster. You need those build-ups to make the plunges feel all the more exhilarating. We just weren't getting this in a sandbox design because all the gamistic things you need were detracting from the story being the focal point. Having flexibility with linear environments also gave us the opportunity to make any given path as wide or as narrow as we pleased. It allowed us to play around with gameplay, narrow stealth areas like when the cops are chasing Wake, and wider areas to allow exploration and that sense of, oh shit, I'm lost, what's in the woods? So yeah, it resulted in a much better game. So while it was a decision that was certainly not made lightly, especially with Microsoft footing the bill, Remedy felt it was the right one for the game. So for the next 2 years, they took a long, hard look at what they had and started to focus. What set pieces and locations worked within the context of the story? What was essential and what was not? They plucked out the areas they had built and started slotting them in like a giant jigsaw puzzle, building each narrative beat one by one, which gave the game a more authored, handcrafted feel. One slight issue though, Remedy, who turned the third-person action genre on its head with Max Payne, was starting to accrue a reputation for super high-quality titles, and a delay to Alan Wake only built up its mystique. Typically, when a game gets delayed over and over, there's this perception it's gonna blow everyone away with innovation or the amount of content.
Alright, Duke Nukem Forever.
This is taking forever.
But at the time, it wasn't really widespread news that the game essentially hit the reset button. What's more is that with it being placed as a big Xbox exclusive during the raging battlefield that was the 7th generation HD Wars, perhaps too much expectation was placed
I never
upon
forget the
Mr.
console
Wake's
wars.
tweed-covered shoulders.
I don't like it, Al.
Actually, no. I think the console war is still going on, but it's less of like a war now and more like a very persistent skirmish.
I don't like any of it. It's not good. In fact, it's the absolute opposite of good.
Eventually, though, as Remedy was piecing together Alan's journey through Bright Falls, a final release date was chosen, May 18th, 2010. Now, while positioned as an Xbox 360 exclusive, a PC version of the game had been confirmed earlier on, which made sense as Remedy had a long history of supporting the format. However, this didn't exactly go to plan, which is something I'll swing back around on in a little bit. Now, while certainly anticipated, the May 18th release date wasn't exactly an ideal situation, because it squarely placed Mr. Wake in the shadow of a number of competitors. I'm not sure if y'all remember, but it was an incredibly busy day for video gaming. On just that specific Tuesday, Remedy had to fend off Prince of Persia: The Forgotten Sands, Split Second, and Red Dead Redemption. In addition,
two out of three of those titles I'm very familiar with, especially Red Dead Redemption. My brother really likes this game and the sequel.
In addition to that, less than a week later came Blur, and then Super Mario Galaxy 2, so there were a lot of places gamers could spend their money that week, and unfortunately, Bright Falls wasn't really one of them.
Right. So much for a quiet vacation.
Despite some very positive reviews, Alan Wake reportedly moved only 145,000 copies in its first 2 weeks, while John Marston roped up 1.5 million in the same time frame. Very slowly over the subsequent months and eventually years, the game inched over the platinum threshold, which, when compared to a lot of other Microsoft-published games of the day, your Gears or your Forzas, wasn't so hot.
And your Halos.
Alan Wake's American Nightmare, an oddball downloadable spin-off released almost 2 years later, didn't help move the needle much. But what really didn't move the needle much in a lot of gamers, and specifically PC gamers' eyes, was the cancellation of the PC version. Around the game's Xbox 360 launch, Microsoft infamously said, "Some games are more suited for the intimacy of the PC, and others are best played from the couch in front of a larger TV screen." We ultimately realized that the most compelling way to experience Alan Wake was on the Xbox 360 platform, so we focused on making it an Xbox 360 exclusive.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that one, Chief. I think you kind of shot yourself in the foot there.
Both Microsoft and Remedy have long histories in PC game development. Okay, this decision was about matching the specific game to the right platform. Okay, a ludicrous nonsense statement nowadays, but 11 years ago, it was fairly typical, as lots of console titles saw incredibly delayed PC ports or even skipped them altogether. Remedy, however, fought for the PC for years, finally convincing Microsoft to give the green light, which resulted in the game hitting Steam in 2012, just ahead of Alan Wake's American Nightmare featuring Cody Rhodes. Ever since then,
that one's kind of lost on me.
Tight-lipped about a return to Bright Falls, occasionally dropping hints on how they'd like to revisit it in some fashion, but never going beyond that.
Will we ever get to play Alan Wake 2?
Yes.
Don't give me hope.
It wasn't until Control...
I want to say this video might have been made a little bit before that Alan Wake 2 announcement.
Tied a number of Remedy's franchises together, confirming they all happened in the same universe, which, for a short time, was the most Alan Wake we had gotten in a decade. But hey, the remasters...
Again, I really need to try out that game. Definitely going to be in my list of games I want to try play or stream.
Out now, and look at Alan's face. It actually looks so much better. I'm sorry, I was trying not to bring it up the entire video, even though I love this game. What is wrong with your face? Ah, man, I love dipping into these more positive episodes every so often, but if you know of any other game development life cycles, good or bad, Let me know in the comments below, over on my Twitter, or slow-mo dive into the Flophouse VIP Patreon and become a big boss to play a part in what I tackle in the future. Then, at that precise moment, the YouTube content creator influencer, the skeleton guy, then did his sign-off for the fans of his show. See you next time, and thanks for watching!
Give me a moment while I jam to this. Oh frick, no. I don't know if that song's safe to listen to or not. Frick. Almost, I want to say I'm safe. I just narrowly dodged a bullet there. Oh yeah, let's check out Legacy of Kain. Legacy of Kain kind of became like one of my new interests. I have zero history with the games, and it's just something that I got curious about a little recently. I've watched a lot of videos about like the lore and the lore of the games and their history, and like little fun factoids. Sorry, I was kind of struck by this Castlevania video down here that's like 3 hours long. I wonder what's going on with that one. Yeah, let's get watching this now. Oh yeah, I think I was gonna say about Legacy of Kain. Like, yeah, it became one of my new interests, and it's also kind of funny that it became like one of those games that I never played, but became super interested, kind of like Resident Evil and Metal Gear Solid. Hopefully, unlike those other games, I might be able to play Metal Gear Solid at some point. I don't know if I'll ever touch a Resident Evil game just for a few factors, but Metal Gear Solid, I am definitely 100% interested actually playing. Even though I usually suck at stealth in some games, but maybe it'll be different for them. I don't know. Anyway, now to the video.
Welcome to another episode of What Happened, the show where, well, why am I suddenly so soft and bulbous? My organic matter is now so plush. Oh, yeah. Tired of everyone having none of you whenever you enter the room? Want to be an irresistible kitty magnet with charm for days? Do you yearn to absolutely be swimming in said sopping kitty? Then you need to hit the link below that'll bring you to the campaign for the official Matt
Excellent
McMuscles
wording
What
there.
Happened plushie. You can squish him, hug him, or use him as a voodoo doll. Go nuts! Act now and you'll receive this bonus tote bag for all your toting needs. If we reach 200 pre-orders, production can officially begin, but there's only 15 days left to make this dream a reality, so pre-order now! Welcome to another thirst-quenching, speech-spewing, and soul-reaving episode of What Happened, the show that was specifically made to talk about mismanaged and abandoned fan-favorite franchises that just so happened to be locked up in the dusty coffins of the video game industry. And honestly, there's few that can compare to the long-slumbering Legacy of Kain, the Eidos interactive vampire series that has a long and oh-so-complicated history. In fact, we touched upon the beginnings of it in our Too Human episode, as the war betwixt Silicon Knights and Crystal Dynamics was an unmitigated pissing contest of legendary proportions. And if that's something you'd like to bone up on, please do. But for our story today, we'll be jumping ahead a bit, but we'll still be in the past. But after the release of 1999's Soul Reaver, after several delays, Crystal Dynamics breathed a sigh of relief, as that game wasn't without its own developmental issues. Despite it being a critical darling and innovative in terms of storytelling, voice acting, and technical level design, the small team struggled to
Yeah, one of the strongest points of the Legacy of Kain series is its story writing and voice acting that's almost like straight out of like a Shakespearean play, but with vampires and Eldritaras.
To keep things off of the cutting room floor and had to compromise their original vision multiple times. They sought to correct these shortcomings with Soul Reaver 2, and while that game was indeed a polished, more ambitious version of its predecessor, the franchise, as it evolved, always seemed to have something holding it back, typically due to tight deadlines and budget restrictions on Eidos Interactive's part. In the early to mid-2000s, the UK-based publisher was on the ropes due to flagging sales of, well, most of their library, which was an oozing financial wound poked.
Wait, I actually want to see the games they worked on. Wait. Oh, okay, okay. I thought I seen this game. I was like, wait, was that a PlayStation game? No, it's PS2. It just Hurdy and Gurdy. They worked on like 3 Disney games. One was like a kart racer. Mad Maestro. I think there's like DC character that goes by that name. Chicken Run, which I believe is like Metal Gear Solid, but with chickens. And The Italian Job. I don't know. I thought that I was gonna say like, oh wow, they really like making the Dalmatians games, but no, they only made 2. I thought I saw like a 3rd or 4th one somewhere. A 3rd and 4th one somewhere.
Oozing financial wound poked even further by the disastrous Angel of Darkness, which hurt the company so much that bankruptcy was a very real possibility.
No, please, I have a wound there.
Come on, don't spoil everything. Crystal Dynamics, meanwhile, pushed on with more Kane sequels, but it wasn't exactly the easiest string of releases for fans to keep track of. The first game, Blood Omen: Legacy of Kain, was released on PC and PlayStation 1. Its sequel, Legacy of Kain: Soul Reaver, also then added a Dreamcast version to the mix. That was then followed up by Soul Reaver 2, a Legacy of Kain series, and was a PS2 console exclusive. Blood Omen 2, a
Yeah, as you can tell, it's one of those franchises that's very kind of inconsistent with the naming. It's easy. It's safe to say that like the series overall is just called Legacy of Kain, but sometimes they're a little bit inconsistent. Like you have Blood Omen and Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver, and then Blood Omen 2, the Legacy of Kain series, and you know.
Sequel released on the Xbox, PS2, PC, and GameCube.
Oh right, I guess yeah, like I should probably they all take place in the same universe. They all take place in the same timeline. But they also kind of tell like multiple stories. Like Legacy, like Soul Reaver is supposed to be like sort of its own. I guess I want to say it's almost the closest comparison I can make is the recent Spider-Man games, like Spider-Man for the PS4 and the Miles Morales games. It's kind of like that in a sense.
And finally, Legacy of Kain: Defiance, which was released in 2000.
Yeah, at that point, it kind of just dropped the at this point, it kind of dropped the moniker for both games. It's not Blood Omen or Soul Reaver. It's Defiance, and Defiance is like, it's like the subtitle for this. Like I said, it got a little weird with the name conventions.
And 3, but dropped the GameCube like a hot purple potato. Starting from Soul Reaver, that's 4 games in 5 years, and maybe because of this, sales dipped lower and lower with every subsequent release, as the blood was being squeezed from the stone at an alarming rate, something Eidos had a tendency to do. But the final straw was when they shut down Core Design, and then handed the keys of the Tomb Raider franchise over to Crystal Dynamics and set them to work, even though they hadn't even finished Defiance yet. This caused a ruffle with certain members of the studio, which led to a small exodus of talent, including the legendary Amy Hennig, who had been the narrative voice of the franchise for half a decade. Since Crystal Dynamics would then be too busy to continue telling tales in the happy-go-lucky world of Nosgoth, Eidos sought out Ritual Entertainment to continue where Defiance left off. Legacy of Kain: Dark Prophecies development lasted for a few months before it was staked through the heart for reasons that are largely unknown. Cancelled and largely unknown are words you're gonna need to get used to, cause if you want to get technical, this was not the only game.
Yeah, you thought Mega Man had it bad having like a bunch of games that were announced and then cancelled. Legacy of Kain is on that same boat with it. Like Kain and Mega Man are just chilling in that boat with their martini glass.
scrapped in the franchise, and it's not even the third or the fourth or the fifth. All told, about 10 some different games that either starred Kane, Raziel, or whatever manner of fanged protags had started development, but were either rebooted or scrapped altogether, with Legacy of Kain: Dead Son being the most famous of them all. So, what happened? When Tomb Raider Legend released in 2006, it marked a turning point for both Eidos and Crystal Dynamics, as its fresh story and positive reviews saw it selling almost 3 million copies in its first year and almost 4 million in total across all versions. Crystal Dynamics then became the de facto factory behind the series, putting out Anniversary and Underworld, and even scaling down for the warmly received Guardian of Light and Temple of Osiris downloadables. This then of course left Legacy of Kain without a dedicated studio to champion it, so it wasn't long before our favorite boisterous vampire boys were tossed into the dungeons of neglect, alongside other Eidos misfits like Gex, Akuji, and the guy from Headhunter.
Clearly a fate worse than death. Or undeath, since they're vampires.
Every so often, fans would get a whiff, a lick of a revival.
Although I guess they must have taken Gex out of there, since I think not too long ago they announced a remaster of the older Gex games, or I think it's either like a remaster of the older Gex games or a sequel. One of the two. Point is, they're making Gex relevant again.
With the most notable evidence being Kane and Raziel's playable appearance in the aforementioned Guardian of Light.
Are you enjoying this, Kane? Is this what you wanted, you bastard?
Why do that if you weren't prepping for a big new game? Well, turns out they weren't. Or were they?
Yeah, the fun fact about that one, this is just my theory. They didn't use, those are clearly the same voices they use, the same voice actors, but the lines themselves for that game, they're actually, I want to say they're actually ripped, like, the things they're saying are ripped from, like, the other game. They didn't, like, brought back the voice actors to, like, read out new lines. No, they just, like, kind of copy-pasted from, like, the other stuff into this game. Which I can't help but feel a little bit disappointed by that. I mean, again, that's just my theory, but it's a theory that I want to say holds some, weight to it. Like, I want to say that's actually what happened, because that line there from Raziel is just straight from, like, I want to say Soul Reaver 2. Like, either the actor was able to perfectly replicate that whole line, or, again, they just copy-pasted from that game and just put it in this one.
No, they weren't. Kinda? Around 2009, Climax Studios had made a name for themselves by making the best Western-developed Silent Hill games, which is not something open for debate. They featured really solid writing and captured some subtlety and nuance, while still retaining some over-the-top moments that might mesh well if applied to other franchises. Being UK-based was also a big plus, as it placed them within spitting distance of Eidos Interactive's main London headquarters. Now, Eidos was aware of the many requests and fan fervor to resurrect the IP, and since Tomb Raider had come roaring back, most figured it was only a matter of time before Kane got his shot. I mean, that makes sense. The franchise was always seen as a distant second or third in Eidos' back catalog. Ah, my poor neglected urban chaos. So, with a capable, willing studio free to work on it, a brand new adventure in Nosgoth was greenlit, but things started off not exactly on the best foot, because 2009 was also pretty eventful elsewhere, as Square had made a bid to buy Eidos outright. And
I actually forgot about this. Yeah, I forgot that they bought Eidos and all those IPs, like Tomb Raider and Legacy Kain, and ended up doing almost nothing with them. I mean, they did do the Tomb Raider reboot, and those did pretty well, but for everything else, there was like just They're just like, what?
They were more than
Oh
willing to
yeah,
sell.
oh yeah, and I guess even Hitman 2, they did a few things with Hitman. Almost forgot. I didn't even notice. Yeah, I don't think I ever realized that Hitman was a Square Enix related title.
Essentially, they would become more of a Western publishing arm for Western things like shooting stuff, cyberpunk, and yes, even vampires. Now, usually when new management takes over, the first order of business is to cancel everything old management did. Fortunately,
for some reason,
Square
like, hey, that looks pretty, like, okay, we're the new bosses around here, what you doing? Oh, that looks pretty cool, well, let's cancel it.
Was fine with Dead Sun, so its development was allowed to continue. But word came down from either them or Eidos or both that this new Legacy of Kain project would need to adhere to a few very not negotiable mandates. It had to have a multiplayer component for some reason. I don't know about all of you, but when I think of dialogue and cutscene heavy action adventures involving vampires, time travel, and old gods, I think about kill streaks and respawn times. Fortunately, cooler heads did prevail because since Climax was a smaller studio employing a
And that's a very unfortunate trend that we're still kind of dealing with today, whereas like more people seem to be more interested in just trying to come up with like new like competitive player versus player type games.
About 100 staff, the multiplayer mode was to be delegated to another studio. In this case, Psyonix. Yes, supersonic acrobatic rocket-powered battle cars Rocket League Psyonix. Pretty crazy to think they were working on this for a time, but just hold that thought for now, I'm gonna get back around to it. Aside from both components using Unreal 3 as a base and both employing a similar unified art style, they're going to be drastically different from each other, leaving Climax to focus on the single-player campaign, which was internally known as Black Cloth, while the multiplayer was called War for Nosgoth. In terms of where on the timeline this game was set, well, the team did a variety of pitches, but one of those rules Square was reticent on was that considering almost 10 years had passed since Defiance's release, that it was risky to produce anything close to a direct sequel. Thus, the decision was made to focus on a brand new character and storyline, which is why the world of Dead Sun took place in the far future, placing it outside the bubble of influence of the past.
When I first heard about that, I generally thought like, oh, so does it take place in modern day? It doesn't. Like it does take place in the future, but it's not like modern day or like, you know, flying car type future.
Games. The new protag was going to be a character called Gain/Asher, a dual entity composed of a human soul inhabiting a vampire body, which would lead to a tumultuous relationship between the two. This far-flung version of Nosgoth was designed
kind of like when you think about it, it's almost like a reverse Venom. Like the symbiote itself is being possessed by the human, not the other way around.
To look closer to real-world ancient architecture with a slightly more ethereal look. In a move I'm sure most fans would love, Square felt that these environments should be both grounded and gritty rather than fantastical and gothic. Yeah, can we lose the tentacles and time travel and do more of a Game of Thrones thing? Logically, the game's size then started to balloon with every milestone, with Square Enix West pointing to games like Assassin's Creed as an example for Climax to model after. Thankfully, the game's core was going to be very similar in gameplay style to the original Soul Reaver. It would just be far more open-ended. Gain would collect unique powers and upgrades, which in turn would allow him to access new areas. Hell, you were still even able to shift to the spectral realm, which was going to be a big element. So with all this stuff going on, this was definitely gearing up to be the most massive game Climax had ever taken on. But the problem was that they simply did not have the staff and experience to build it in a timely fashion. Their previous efforts were all focused, small-scale titles like Silent Hill, Bloodforge, and Ghost Rider, while Assassin's Creed entries had veritable armies behind them, which is how Ubisoft pumped out so many. This made for
better,
slow
for
but
worse.
steady progress, but anonymous employees within Climax said a good portion of that slow progress was due to the direction of Square Enix upper management, which was charitably described as fractured and inconsistent. Ever-changing and unrealistic demands of what the game should be, something all too common in the industry, were regularly handed down, and it took Climax a while to suss out exactly what was wanted. This, of course, resulted in some friction in the partnership, as Climax tried to push back against these directives whenever they could, but would always have to relent in the end. Square, meanwhile, was frustrated at this glacial process, and as time went on, grew unsure of the game's sales viability. If I didn't mention this before, Dead Sun was never officially announced, thus the marketing machine had yet to start revving up, so the casual fan at the time had no idea this even existed. It's thanks largely to the investigations of the legendary Mama Robotnik that a number of Kane-related projects and behind-the-scenes content came to light. In a series of illuminating posts, complete with screenshots and artwork, they confirmed and clarified the bulk of what we know about Dead Sun, including its many guises. The target format of the game changed rapidly during development.
For a canceled game, there's like so much footage from it. Like, it looks like it was near completion.
At one point, it was envisioned as a small project, possibly downloadable, and then as an Xbox 360/PS.
This does not look like it should be a downloadable title. This looks good enough to be a physically released game.
PS3 retail release. In its final form, the game would have been a PlayStation 4 launch title. I am unclear whether an Xbox One or PC release was also planned. A large amount of work went into the game, with a tremendous amount of hours contributed by the artists. Development had progressed to the point in which some voice acting/motion capture had taken place. If you want more insight into Mama Robotnik's findings, then check out the link in the description below. Fascinating stuff. Despite the game starting to come together, however, Square Enix came to the decision that it somehow wasn't, and when they factored in the estimated marketing costs, they came to the conclusion that the game would fail to meet their sales expectations. Now, reportedly, they had come to this decision by themselves, which meant they did not tell Climax for an undetermined amount of time, which was, pretty shitty. Why this is shitty is because the team was still coming in on weekends and late nights, plugging away on their biggest project, completely oblivious to the invisible writing on the wall. Climax was eventually told that Square would not be investing any further into the land of
whoa. Speaking of hearing, all of a sudden I can't hear. What the heck happened?
And the game was...
That was weird.
Climax was eventually told that Square would not be investing any further into the land of Nosgoth, and the game was quietly cancelled sometime in 2012. Thanks to Mama Robotnik, though, Dead Sun's existence was made public via their investigative posts in mid-2013, as Climax themselves were not legally allowed to disclose anything, as Square had shackled some ironclad NDAs around their collective necks. When this news started trickling out, fans were understandably a little very upset.
Yeah, that tends to happen when you don't get like a new installment for a long time, and then you hear news about a new game, finally a new game coming out, only to end up being canceled. So it's like one of those moments where you wish you can give up, but you just can't.
Canceled Kane title, and it had gotten really far in development. Back in 1999, lines of communication to publishers were limited, but in 2013, the online discourse made its way to Square very easily, to the point that they had to address it. This unenviable task fell to poor sumbitch George Kellyan, Square community manager who was put in front of the firing squad. I can confirm that Dead Sun was a project which had been in development, but which was cancelled. I know it's disappointing to hear about these things out of context, and whilst some of the details are accurate, some details are not. You know, game projects can be cancelled for a variety of reasons, and I know it's very hard to tell from images and info alone, but in the end, Legacy of Kain Dead Sun just wasn't the right game at the right time, but you'll have to take me at my word on that, I'm afraid. Climax.
Okay, what is going on with my just my headset?
CEO to take me at my word on that, I'm afraid. Climax.
Yeah, sometimes the audio is just giving up on me. I don't know if that's the headphones or what. That's weird.
CEO Simon Gardner, for his part, also addressed the leaks, but obviously was very tight-lipped. As you would expect, we are covered under NDA and really don't have anything to add. Many games never see the light of day for lots of different reasons, especially over the last few years where business models and markets have been evolving rapidly. We continue to have a good relationship with Square Enix. I mean, do you though? Because Climax never worked with Square ever again, so obviously
understandably
things might have gotten a little strained. 2 years later, in a slightly ironic twist, Climax would then go on to develop their own Assassin's Creed titles, but in the form of the downloadable Chronicles trilogy. Ever since then, the studio has retained a low profile with some understated releases, although they did assist Housemarque with the recent Returnal. Funnily enough, even though Square apparently felt that Dead Sun was the wrong game at the wrong time, felt that War for Nosgoth, the multiplayer component, was the right game at the right time. So,
because of course they would. Because no offense to Square, they kind of suck. They kind of suck at what they do.
they had Psionics.
Like, I mean, Square have made some really prominent titles, but then they pull like stupid BS like this.
Morph it into its own standalone free-to-play MMO thing, and simply called it Nosgoth. Doing stuff like this was something Square was all jacked up on back then, as evidenced by the tragic Triad Wars, the multiplayer MMO spin-off of Sleeping Dogs that precisely 0 people wanted, and was instrumental in destroying United Front Games.
You can argue that they're still kind of doing something like this today with that Final Fantasy VII Battle Royale game, Babylon's Fall. I mean, okay, granted, Babylon's Fall is kind of like its own thing, but yeah, oh yeah, and that Chocobo go-kart, Chocobo kart game, Chocobo GPX or something, I forgot what it was called, but that one too. They just really want to try out the free-to-play gaming scene, even though they really kind of suck at it.
Wanted by fans was something that Triad Wars shared with Nosgoth. No one who grew up with a narratively robust action-adventure series wanted it to live on in free-to-play Drek, and thus it never even left early access on Steam and was completely shut down with all development suspended less than a year after it debuted. Psionics, for their part, seemed to have done okay for themselves in the end, I guess. As of 2019, Square Enix has said there are no plans to bring the franchise back, which I'm sure most fans are delighted to hear. This is one of those situations where if a
bright side, I don't remember. Yeah, I think they ended up, THQ Nordic ended up, I don't think it was THQ Nordic. The point, okay, I don't remember how, but Square Enix no longer owns Legacy of Kain, Tomb Raider, and all those other Eidos titles. So good for that. I don't know who owns them now, but I do remember not too long ago. I want to say it was like either a year ago or a couple of months back. They did release like official Q&A, like an official Q&A asking like their fans what they want to see for a future Legacy title game, or what they like about the series. So that is probably a good sign for something Legacy of Kain coming out in the near future. I even participated in it. I even like answered a couple of questions. I even told them like, I remember one of the questions they gave out was like, would you like to see like a Legacy of Kain MMO? And yeah, I ended up picking yes, because I think the world of Nosgoth would be a very fun setting for an MMO. I'm not saying they have to, because if there's anything I learned from the MMO industry, that can be very a very sink or swim type of industry. Like if your MMO does not do well, chances are your whole company is gonna go down. That's why I'm hearing from, like, you know, MMOs that try to start out and then they don't do well, then no, they shut down a service, but some of the company that made them just goes out of business. But yeah, I guess the point I'm trying to make is that there's definitely hints that there's gonna be a new one in the future.
Company couldn't care less about a particular IP, they should maybe think of selling the rights to someone who will. Hell, maybe they could at least consider re-releasing the first couple of entries of this saga on modern platforms with shiny new ports. Night Dive Studios has done some wonderful work on that front with Doom 64.
All the I want to say all the games for the most part are all available on like Steam and GOG. The original Blood Omen, I know for a fact, it's really you can get on GOG. Soul Reaver 2, Blood Omen 2, and I think maybe Defiance are available in Steam. Although last time I checked, Soul Reaver 1 is not working well. Like you can find it on Steam, but you can't play it. Apparently they took it down and trying to fix it. And I don't know what happened with that one. It's been like that for like a long time now, so yeah, you can't play the series in its entirety at the moment.
Or Turok and the recent Shadow Man remaster, which is excellent, by the way. I mean, that can't be too costly, can it? Square, buddy, if you're fine with
I forgot about the Avengers game
every single month, then I don't think it's too much to ask to allow fans both old and new to experience these vampiric classics one more time. I'm just saying. Thanks to Rast for becoming a big boss down at the Flophouse VIP Patreon and nominating Dead Son for this week's episode. And if you know of any other long forgotten games, movies, or etc. you'd like me to cover, you can do the same in the comments below over on my Twitter, and you can also politely bug Square Enix for more Legacy of Kain at these accounts on your screen.
Thankfully you don't have to do that anymore, but you have to pester someone for one. Okay, 3 hours has pretty much passed, but I do want to watch one more video. The recent death battle video of Alex Mercer and Cole McGrath from Infamous. I've actually watched this video before, but I want to see it again because I actually really like this video. I have not watched Death Battle in a long time, but god dang, like this was a really fun video to watch. Just need to get through that ad. And I'll be skipping this ad too.
Death Battle is sponsored by HelloFresh
and Shady Rays. Cole McGrath, the patron saint of Infamous.
Alex Mercer.
Wait, hold on. What is...
Blacklight.
Okay, there we go.
The patron saint of Infamous.
Alex Mercer, the Blacklight virus prototype from Prototype. That's right, champions. You voted for it, so we're finally doing it. Long after these characters were ever relevant. Oh, hey, look what I found in the truck.
Yeah, they kind of took them a long time to finally get to this. Like, it probably would have been even more... Maybe it probably would have gotten, like, more traction, but now it just seems like they're just doing this for fun.
Crash, an old script we wrote for this very matchup way back in 2013.
Wait, we haven't emptied our trash in 10 years?
He's Wiz and I'm Boomstick.
And it's our job to analyze their weapons, armor, and skills to find out who would win a death battle. With great power comes great responsibility. Tobey Maguire's not the only superhero who's had to learn that lesson.
Cole McGrath was just your average delivery boy in Empire City until one day he opened a package that exploded in his face.
This was the Ray Sphere, a device that, upon erupting, destroyed much of the city and tore through Cole at the atomic level,
killing him instantly. Nah, actually, he scooped up some superpowers. Cool, zippity-zappity superpowers.
More specifically, Cole became a conduit.
He became Electro from Spider-Man.
One of many beings who were granted supernatural abilities from the ray sphere explosion.
Which also turned Empire City into a godforsaken hellscape. This world needed a hero, or at least an anti-hero willing to clean up the mess he sorta technically made.
Cole put his powers to the test battling rogue superpowered conduits, including the mastermind behind the blast, Kessler.
Let's be real, none of Cole's powers are as sick nasty as his parkour skills, but his ability to manipulate electricity is pretty sweet too.
Cole controls electromagnetic energy. Not only can he generate a smorgasbord of powerful lightning attacks, he can also manipulate thermal, kinetic, and gravitational energies. Electromagnetism is pretty broad after all. This includes his radar pulse, which detects the bioelectricity inside organisms even if they're hidden or transformed.
And for good measure, he got to add some ice powers to his kit. He can throw ice grenades, shoot ice spikes, and let out some epic ice farts.
He can levitate like Electric Iron Man, grind on rails like Shadow the Hedgehog, read your mind like Goku's muffin button, charge up with extra karmic energy, also like Shadow the Hedgehog, and generate force fields like
Shadow the Hedgehog.
But these aren't just force fields. They literally convert any matter they touch into energy that Cole absorbs. That's insane.
How's that?
Are you familiar with a little equation called E equals mc squared?
No.
Oh, well, it defines the mathematical relationship between matter and energy, essentially how much energy any given mass contains.
Okay, the largest mass object Cole absorbs is a 343-gram helicopter chain gun round.
Perfectly converting matter to energy is technically impossible, but hey, this is a video game. The mass contained in that bullet, when multiplied by the speed of light squared, would release an energy equivalent to over 7 megatons of TNT. This means Cole's energy output is basically fueled by a nuclear reactor.
Oh, so he's like a living super bomb, always ready to go off. Sounds like my first ex-wife.
Should he somehow run low on energy, he can drain it from nearby appliances to recharge. He's even learned to drain the bioelectricity from people, like this.
Like an electric
Cole
vampire.
Can focus his electricity through his amp, a giant tuning fork which lets him ring around the Rosia to death. Or he can just make lightsabers out of his hands. That's cool too. And because he follows Pokemon rules, Cole's extra resistant to electric attacks.
With these powers, Cole chewed through Kessler's forces, including Sasha, whose black tar powers could infect and control minds.
And he eventually faced down that son of a bitch himself and pwned his ass, despite Kessler having his exact same powers. Coincidence?
Turns out the architect of Cole's misery was himself from an alternate future timeline, manipulating events from the shadows to ensure this version of Cole became a better hero than Kessler ever was.
Yeah, you see, Cole's superpowers are molded through his actions, increasing in power and utility based on how good or evil he acts. Naturally, as a good person, Cole shaped his powers to be more focused to target the bad guys. That's pussy shit! Evil Cole is way more awesome, son! He blows everything up! Collateral damage? Who cares? He can control fire!
That was weird.
That just happened. Oh, who wrote this shit?
The point is, Kessler's whole plan was meant to prevent the apocalypse, which would appear in the form of the Beast, a conduit of unimaginable power.
Wait, turn it.
Beast,
Trying to see if my headphones are like turning off my headphones.
Conduit of
okay, there we go.
Unimaginable power. Kessler's whole plan was meant to prevent the apocalypse, which would appear in the form of the Beast, a conduit of unimaginable power.
Cole is strong enough to create massive thunderstorms, fast enough to route electricity moving at 90% the speed of light, and maybe thanks to Kessler, tough enough to take on the Beast.
Which possessed the power of the Ray Sphere itself. It could regenerate at an atomic level and eradicate all of Empire City in a single attack. Fortunately, after a grueling battle, Cole defeated the Beast once and for all.
Though ultimately, it wasn't Cole's power that made him a hero.
In order to stop a plague created by the Ray Sphere, Cole sacrificed his life, eradicating the conduit genes and saving all of humanity.
Sure, he also killed thousands of conduits in the process, but hey, what's a few corpses when building a better tomorrow? This trolley stops for no one.
Cole was remembered as a saint by the people of New Marais, as a hero by the friends he left behind, and an inspiration to future generations. A true testament to the responsibility of power.
This This episode of Death Battle is sponsored by
And now we
HelloFresh.
skip this
HelloFresh
part.
is America's #1 meal kit. With great power comes great responsibility.
Oh, fuck, I think I ended the
But
beginning of the video
not
again.
Everybody's got an Uncle Ben to tell him that.
Alex Mercer woke up in hell. Manhattan Island was gripped by the horrific Black Light virus, transforming its citizens into terrifying monsters.
Alex had no memories. He was a man without a past, and maybe no future. But he did have one thing.
The Black Light virus can rewrite your cells all the way down to your DNA. And somehow it granted Alex incredible superhuman abilities. He can infect anyone he touches with this virus, altering their biology at the molecular level in seconds, and giving him complete control over their actions.
So Alex pushed on, desperate to avenge himself and the city by finding whatever monster unleashed this nightmare and eat them. Yeah, he can consume people to give himself a power boost. He's like Kirby, if Kirby listened to Linkin Park.
This extra biomass gives him superhuman strength, a greater metabolic rate, increased reaction times, and even a regenerative healing factor. Essentially, Alex is an ever-evolving super being, the ultimate being.
Oh, like Shadow the Hedgehog!
By consuming victims, Alex also receives all their
Maybe
memories and experiences.
Maybe they should have been a three-way death battle with Cole, Alex, and Shadow.
Including Peter Randall, a 69-year-old man whose entire history Alex processed in just 11 seconds. Being able to condense that much information into that time frame means Alex can perceive events happening within 5 nanoseconds.
Which is about how—
What do you mean, man? He's like the ultimate life form. He says that like all the time, so he must be powerful.
long I was married to my second ex-wife.
Alex can shapeshift his body at will, creating disguises, increasing his muscle mass, and forming nearly unbreakable armor. And when he wants to kill someone, he can become his own weapon, turning his limbs into claws and blades, or generating—
I'm gonna say he was just having an off day those times he lost.
countless tendrils that give him unmatched control over his environment.
With these goopy powers, he came up with a bunch of Street Fighter moves, like the air dash, the cannonball, the bullet—
Oh, darn it. I know for a fact there's nothing wrong with the video or YouTube, it's just, I don't know, my headphones are just being weird.
The cannonball, the bullet dive drop, and the hunter dirt nap. Pretty sure that was my third ex-wife's boyfriend's stripper name.
And after consuming enough people, Alex reaches critical mass and can unleash his evil slop in powerful ultimate attacks.
Like the Tendril Barrage Devastator. Oh, it's beautiful.
Despite being seen as the world's most wanted terrorist, fair, Alex used his powers to stop the spread of the virus and end the city's nuclear devastation.
It was then he learned the truth. He wasn't Alex Mercer at all.
He was the Blacklight virus itself, which absorbed the memories and likeness of the real Alex Mercer, who was not only dead, but actually responsible for all of this in the first place. To decipher this, I recreated the Blacklight virus myself, the most dangerous—
why is it empty?
He's right behind me, isn't he?
So the man Alex was hunting the whole time was himself. Dun dun dun.
That's right, Booms.
I don't know, I feel like that would have been a little bit redundant. I mean, Alex and Venom has like very similar power sets.
Turns out Dr. Alex Mercer helped create the Blacklight virus, and when things didn't work out and he was about to die, he recklessly unleashed it upon the city.
What a petty SOB! What he didn't know was that the virus would merge with his sentience and memories and become a new Alex. How? Why? Don't question it, it's a nothing burger.
But is this massive viral material that calls itself Alex actually human in any meaningful way?
The poor bastard sure tried to be. Too bad humans can be dicks, and everyone kept betraying him. Even the so-called love of his life, who shot him in the face. Whoa! So, Alex figured, obviously, humanity had to go.
Not just go, but be made better. Whatever goodness remaining with this Alex was left behind as he plotted to unleash a second Blacklight virus, recreating humanity into a super species in his own image. Great power became great terror.
Classic and—
Maybe it's just because, I have a particular fondness towards Alex. But I would, like, to this day, I'm still not sure turning him into the villain for the next game was a smart move. Like, I don't know, like, I can definitely see the appeal of, like, having your hero from one story be a villain in another, but I mean, it definitely plays in the whole, you know, the idea of like you either die here or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. Like I don't know. Like I said, maybe it's just because I just have a particular fondness for this guy, or maybe I just really don't like James Heller, or at least I just don't like him when I don't like his personality. Since they'll get to it in this video in just a moment.
Anime RPG villain stuff, and he was strong enough to do it. Alex can casually tear buildings apart, dodge supersonic tank shells, and even defeated the Supreme Hunter, who was tough enough to survive a nuclear blast that would have leveled Manhattan.
Based on the blast radius given in-game, that's 450 kilotons of TNT.
Speaking of nukes, Alex survived one. His healing factor is off the chain, and after being blasted into paste, all he needed was the tiniest bit of himself to come back good as new.
His healing occurs at the cellular level, making him virtually impossible to kill so long as he keeps consuming.
But attempting to take over the world and kill millions of people pissed off a certain James Heller, a dude who had just had enough of his fucking weird, fucking rambling shit.
Yeah, that's my issue with the character. His whole personality is that he's perpetually angry and just swears a lot. Like, I'm not saying like Alex was the pinnacle of like the pinnacle of well-written characters, but you know, the sequel probably would have fixed that. It probably would have made it more interesting, but they end up just making him to a villain, and we end up getting like the Sweary McSwearson. I don't know. Like, he definitely, like, maybe I'm being a little bit too harsh on the guy. I mean, he does. I mean, he's a little bit more sympathetic compared to Alex. Like, when I say he has a family, that one point in the game he has to save, but I don't know. Maybe maybe I'll change my opinion if I ever get around playing Prototype 2 and not play on a higher difficulty, because Jesus Christ, going through that was hell for me.
Use the same virus powers to consume Alex once and for all.
Live by the Kirby symbiote, die by the Kirby symbiote.
Kirby
Is
symbiote.
Alex just a virus after all? I mean, what's more human than the urge to conquer the world, drive its species to the slaughter, consume its raw genetic resources, and crown yourself king? Maybe the day Alex Mercer died was the day he truly became human.
Wow, that was intense.
Fuck yeah, it was.
This episode is sponsored by Shady Rays.
All right, now to the oh frick. Okay, yep. Now to the death battle.
All right, the combatants are set. Let's end this debate once and for all.
It's time for a death battle!
I think they make it worse. I think they did brought back those big freaking liquor looking things in the sequel too. So yeah, something to keep in mind for me in the future. Anyway, sorry about that.
I think I've still got room for dessert. Buddy, you are one sick freak.
Whoa. the better.
The only vermin I see here is you.
You don't want to give me your power. Fine, I'll just take it.
Good idea. This world sure isn't perfect, but it's a lot better without you in it, asshole.
Oh, now I know.
That is a really good death battle, I have to say, because I want to say, like, okay, good. Again, like, I have not watched Death Battle in a long time, but I do remember a lot of their older stuff. And yeah, I watched a lot of their older stuff. And compared to this one just feels like the most natural of, like, Death Battle pair-up matchups, I want to say. Because it almost makes you forget that these two characters are supposed to be from two completely different game series. They just meld together so well. Like, it ends up becoming less of a death battle, and you just end up watching, like, you know, a classic, like, hero versus villain kind of story. Yeah, this is definitely, like, a personal favorite of mine. And also the music. The music the music is also really great too. I've been hearing like a lot since watching this. I never played Infamous, so I had like a certain bias towards Alex. But during but since Alex was depicting being very like was acting a little bit more malicious, I was actually rooting towards Cole. Like after watching this video, after watching this battle, I actually I kind of wish I really did play the Infamous games. Now I kind of regret never playing those because wow, I missed out a whole lot of it. I'm just kind of hoping someday like they decide to like remaster those and make it available for either for modern PlayStation consoles or just PC or both, whatever works, and hopefully not bork them up like how they did for Prototype.
When that script was in the trash, I had to hear someone say awesome sauce.
Both opponents were incredibly versatile and deadly, and both could match each other's powers blow for blow.
They could each create weapons, amplify their strength, and fight at range.
But could Cole survive Alex's infection? Well, Alex would usually need to weaken an opponent to get that trick to work. Even then, the Ray Sphere incident that created Cole's powers in the first place ripped apart everyone else down to the atomic level, and the Beast's attacks were capable of the same thing. Considering the Blacklight virus only works down to molecular DNA, it's reasonable to say Cole would be able to resist it.
Sure, Alex could have potentially consumed Cole's biomass to give himself an edge, but Cole could just do the same thing to Alex, absorbing his bioelectricity to power himself back up.
But nothing could challenge the gap in power. Everything Alex survived could simply not match Cole's force fields, and especially not the power of the Beast. The blast the Beast created actually had a much wider radius than the one the Supreme Hunter could survive. To compete with these foes, this means Cole was simply far more powerful than Alex.
Speaking of the Beast, Cole's ability to disintegrate it at the atomic level meant that even Alex's crazy molecular regeneration couldn't stand up to Cole's might.
Just like how Cole could overpower Kessler despite his resistance to electricity, or how he resisted Sasha's mind control powers, which were eerily similar to the Blacklight virus.
But I bet you're wondering, what if Alex fought evil Cole instead? Well, it'd be even worse, because that Cole took the Beast's power for himself. That's good night for Angry Virus Boy.
Alex was a versatile, deadly opponent, but Cole's counters, speed, and raw power gave him the edge.
Alex got the Cole shoulder, just like this stupid script.
The winner is Cole McGrath.
Well, that was a pretty fun time, I want to say. Watched a lot of what happened, and ended up finishing off just watching Death Battle. I still hope that I'll be able to play games again other than Halo Infinite and I guess even West of Dead. I think I can also play the Master Chief Collection, but that's just basically just more Halo. Okay. I'm gonna like try to start up another raid and see if someone's up. Oh yeah. Okay. I just need to remember how to raid again. This will just be a quick moment. I always need to remind myself how to do this. And it's like so simple too, but I want to make sure I get it right and not make it weird for me. Okay, okay. Yeah, such a weird name. Hope I didn't fat finger or anything. Don't worry about it. Like, remember, like, I only just do that. I only, like, just want to let you, lip syncing is a little weird. I don't know. Blah, 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 blah. Anyway, yeah. Yeah, I'm only doing this just, like, I only just want to let you guys, give you guys a heads up if you want to, like, you know, see what's going on my streams or not. Okay, let's see if this, works. Okay, yep. This is GAT720. Oh, frick. Signing out. Oh, almost forgot about this.